as it looks like, we have to follow the legality of the law, because if not, it could be an impeachable offense against a sitting president, whether it's President Tinubu or any other one. But what was done is something that actually brings joy to us and shows that Nigeria can still exercise its powers as a big brother within the continent, but within the ambit of the law. And in this instance, we've done very well by following the ECOWAS protocols. You see, other countries were called to deploy troops, but how many were eventually deployed? It was Nigeria that did that. But why don't we deploy that sort of weight into tackling the criminals, the bandits, the terrorists that the country? Because that's what every Nigerian citizen waking up this morning is asking. If we have this power to tackle these coup plotters and restore legitimacy back to the government in Benin Republic, how come we are not using the same that the entire square meters of the Nigerian Federation is within the control of our armed forces, and we don't have anybody, troubling us in ungoverned spaces? Well, I really salute President Bola Tinubu's courage, because it takes courage for you to do that, and then a whole lot of organization. But ECOWAS needs to really, take a critical look at this and see how Nigeria will benefit from what we have done. Because, Dr. Abati, the major challenge I have with these West African countries, especially the Francophone countries, is that they don't give us our dues. Like you have said now, when it comes to voting Nigeria at the UN or other international organizations, you'll be surprised that Benin Republic would vote against us. They refuse to acknowledge what we did. I mean, President Patrice Talon did not even acknowledge President Tinubu's action, Nigeria's action. They will go and be supporting the French and other global powers, but they will be kicking against Nigerians or Nigeria's candidacies and all of that. So, well, these are the issues at stake. As to the issue of Atiku visiting former President Goodluck Jonathan, yes, I mean, it's related to what happened to former President Goodluck Jonathan in Guinea-Bissau, which is related to what we are saying. A former president was stranded and eventually he was evacuated. Well, Atiku is going there to go and show solidarity, and it's a very good move. But this is coming too late, because Atiku is seeking solidarity everywhere.
I played that video. It was actually because of that statement that it could be an impeachable offense, and people started talking about it a couple of days ago. I saw it. I just decided not to play it because I didn't know how they arrived at that conclusion. But people have very, very wild imagination, so to speak. Well, nobody's impeaching President Tinubu for what he did in Benin Republic, and this is from Punch newspaper. The Senate has given its approval for President Bola Tinubu's request to send Nigerian troops to the Republic of Benin as part of efforts to help restore calm and stability after last weekend's attempted military takeover. The endorsement was announced on Tuesday by Senate President Godswill Akpabio during plenary, following a review of the President's letter in the Committee of the Whole, in accordance with Section 5, Part 2 of the Constitution channels reports. Lawmakers voted unanimously to support the deployment, effectively granting parliamentary authorization for the regional security mission. Akpabio hailed the resolution as timely, stressing that unrest in any neighboring country could easily destabilize the wider region. Quote, "An injury to one is an injury to all, he stated. All right, so nothing about impeaching anybody. It's what needed to be done, and I'm glad that Nigeria did that. Moving on, I'd like to respond to, I was going to respond to somebody on YouTube, but the YouTube, we had to restart YouTube. So if you said something earlier and I did not respond, it's because we had to start all over again. But we're good now. If you're on YouTube, please like the live. Let's like the live so that the algorithm can recommend the live stream to other people. All right. A few things before we move on. Dangote announces $700 million education fund for Nigerians. This is from the Cable. Aliko Dangote, chairman of the Dangote Group, says his foundation will invest $700 million in education of Nigerians over the next 10 years. Speaking on Sunday at the 2025 Doha Forum in Doha, Qatar, the business magnate committed to supporting over 155,000 Nigerians who will be drawn across secondary schools and universities in the country. Dangote, during a panel session that featured Bill Gates and Sheikh Al-Mayasa, discussed how innovation, philanthropy, and cultural investment are reshaping opportunity across Africa and beyond. He said the investment is poised to reduce the number of children who are out of school in Nigeria and provide more manpower with the technical capacity to advance the economy of Nigeria. All right, moving away from that, I'd like to play you a video from an event that Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka attended recently, and this stuff he said. It was an interesting take, to be honest, but I think it's something you should know. Take a listen to Professor Wole Soyinka as he essentially criticized Sheyi Tinubu, because of the litany of soldiers that have to be on his entourage. Take a listen, please.
Tinubu didn't have to send the Air Force and the military to deal with this particular insurrection, this threat to our own sense of security and equilibrium. No, there are easier ways of doing it. Let me tell you where Tinubu should have looked for forces to quell that insurrection. Right here in Lagos. Right here. Or in Abuja, perhaps, I don't know. But there was no need to call the military or the Air Force. I'll tell you what happened. On one of my home visits, this is about 2 months ago, I was coming out of a hotel and I saw what looked like a film set. And I said, oh, they're shooting a film. That was on the grounds of this hotel. And a young man detached himself from the actors, came over and greeted me, very polite, very nice young man. And I said, are you shooting somebody? I said, I'm just joking. Are you shooting a film? He said, no. And I looked around. There was nearly a whole battalion occupying the grounds of that hotel, in Ikoyi, right here. So I got back in my car and I who that young man was. And he told me. And I saw this SWAT team, a mixture. They were at least heavily armed, at least some 15 or so heavily armed to the teeth security personnel. Looked sufficient to take over a small country, neighboring city like Benin. And I think the next time the president should just call and say, Sheyi, go and quell the rebellion over there. I was so astonished that I started looking for the National Security Advisor. I said, track him down for me. I think they got him somewhere in Paris, but I was with the president. He was at a meeting. And I said, I've just seen something I can't believe, I don't understand. And I described the scene to him. I said, do you mean that a child of the head of state goes around with an army for his protection or whatever? I couldn't believe it. Later on, I did some investigative journalism. And I inquired, and I found that apparently this is how this young man goes around with his battalion, these heavy armed soldiers. Of course, the road was cleared before his car went out. I stayed until it seemed he was leaving. So next time there's an insurrection, I think the president should just call that young man and say, no, put down those stupid people there. You have enough troops under your command, so don't bother me with all these security issues any longer. Let's not overdo things. This is not the first country that has a head of state. It's not the first country whose head of state has families. And I think children should know their place. They are not potentates. They're not heads of state. And the security architecture of a nation like this suffers some injury and alienation when we see such a heavy devotion of security to one young individual. You'll excuse me, but I'm in and out most of the time. And this place is named after me. It's my center. So if I go off the immediate subject of our ward, I hope you will excuse me for taking possession of my own center.
Wow, that was Professor Wole Soyinka at the National Theatre, now Wole Soyinka Center for Culture and Arts, or Arts and Culture. It's quite interesting, and to be honest, I agree with what he said. I think it's important to have that balance. And not be like, say, the entire troop, they follow one person. It's quite interesting the way he said it. All right. Let's go to some good things. After the chiding by the good professor, there's some other good things I think we should know happening in the nation. First, let's go to this thing about the stability of the naira. And this is coming from Ayo Teriba. He's an economist and he was a guest on Arise News. He had this to say on what's happening with the Nigerian economy. Take a listen, please.
I suggest we approach the conversation in the following manner. First, let's count what's improving, and I'll help with that. Then let's identify what more needs to improve.
Okay.
And first, as to what's improving, we were discussing 42 billion reserves on the 24th of December last year. The president in his charter mentioned 42 billion in reserves, and we were puncturing it that it wasn't the gross reserves that mattered, it was the net, and as of that date, we didn't know what net was. That if net reserves could become adequate, the naira would stabilize and inflation would come down. We said that much. Okay, now, around the first quarter, the CBN informed us that net reserves had been 23 billion. Around that date of the conversation, though we didn't know it. And last Friday, the Central Bank governor has come to update us again that it's now 29 billion. So don't worry about 46 billion in gross reserves.
India is quoting over 600 billion.
The ratio, it's a strong ratio.
What matters is that net reserves now stand at 29 billion. From 4 billion in 2023.
Okay.
And that's what lies behind the stability of the exchange rate and the deceleration of inflation and the recovery that we are now getting. Now, what more do we need to do in MTF? I feel that the economy has turned out better than what the government had projected that it will be about this time. Inflation, they say, will be 15% by December. In October, it was already at 16%. And if it continues in the trend that we've seen since December last year, it should be much better than 15%.
But with insecurity,
but government is once again now saying that the exchange rates next year will be 1,512, suggesting it will be worse than it currently is. What's improving? And I'll help with that. Then let's identify what more needs to improve.
Okay.
And first, as to what's improving, we were discussing 42 billion reserves on the 24th of December last year. The president in his charter mentioned 42 billion in reserves, and we were puncturing it that it wasn't the gross reserves that mattered, it was the net, and as of that date, we didn't know what was. That if net reserves could become adequate, the naira would stabilize and inflation would come down. We said that much. Okay, now, around the first quarter, the CBN informed us that net reserves had been 23 billion. Around that date of the conversation, though we didn't know it. And last Friday, the central bank governor has come to update us again that it's now 29 billion. So don't worry about 46 billion in gross reserves.
India is coaching over 600 billion.
The ratio, it's a strong
What
ratio.
What matters
It's a ratio.
is that
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for letting me. So I was saying that Nigeria recorded 3.98% GDP growth in Q3. That's third quarter of this year, 2025. Net reserves have gone up from $2 billion in 2023 to $29 billion in 2025. And the gross reserves sit around $46 billion. That's a lot of growth, right, in the last 2 years. But then I noticed that while the gentleman, Mr. Teriba, was talking about how that helps stabilize the Naira, the lady kept chipping in about security, because somehow it looks like some of us do not really like the idea of good news. We always have to look for something negative so we can balance it. It's when you balance good and some evil, that's when you know that you are objective. That's ridiculous, by the way. But let's even say something about the security issue. The governor of Niger State, Governor Bago, has received 100 rescued school children who were abducted from St. Mary's Private Catholic Primary and Secondary School, Papiri, at Niger State Government House. Right? Apparently, this is after the federal government secured the release of 100 of the school children abducted from St. Mary's Private Catholic Primary and Secondary School, Papiri, in Agwara local government area, Niger State. I'm reading from Nigerian Affairs Journal and also from Nigerian Affairs Journal. So you don't have to bring in something that is not working when you hear that something is working. Why not talk about what is working and how you can make that thing better before you then remember that, there's another thing that's not working, I must introduce it into the conversation, even when it has nothing to do with what you're discussing at that moment. That moment you're talking monetary policy, you're talking about stability of the Naira. Why not just focus on that? I don't know what happens to folks, especially on our rise, but somehow they must find a way to... Anyway, good conversation they had, and it's also good to know that there's growth in the economy. And something else also happened. Ordered ministries, departments, and agencies to carry over 70% of the 2025 capital budget into the 2026 fiscal year, as the administration moves to prioritize the completion of existing projects and contain spending pressures in the face of weak revenues. All right, if you're an economist, when the time comes, please feel free to come up and educate us on these things. Federal government, another news, federal government proposes new co-funding model governance overall. I'll take that again. This is from the cable, by the way. Federal government proposes new co-funding model governance overhaul to reposition NYSC. Speaking in Abuja on Monday at a stakeholders consultative forum, Adisa Bala Usman, Special Advisor to the President on Policy and Coordination, said while the scheme had for more than 5 decades promoted unity and civic responsibility, it could no longer operate under systems designed over 50 years ago. She said this at an event that was convened to validate recommendations of the NYSC Reform Committee. Quote, for over 5 decades, the NYSC has symbolized unity, civic responsibility, and national integration. Yet, as with all human institutions, relevance requires reinvention. End of quote, she said. These realities have made clear that the current structure, centralized, analog, financially overstretched, and misaligned with national manpower needs, cannot carry the scheme into the future. Bala Usman, who is also the head of the Central Results Delivery Coordination Unit, said diagnostic reviews by the committee indicated legal, fiscal, operational, and digital gaps that required urgent intervention. I'm just going to scroll down because she listed other recommendations. Okay, the presidential aide said the committee had proposed, this is what I want to read. She said the committee had proposed legislative amendments to provide for digital service processes, gender-responsive deployment, and new co-funding arrangements, including state and local governments for the NYSC. That would be interesting. She listed other recommendations to include a unified digital service platform, stronger employer obligations, a three-tier governance structure, and a redesigned skills development model with zonal innovation hubs. A proposed 2 billion naira innovation fund was also included in the plan. That's from the cable. Let's quickly wrap up this news so we can get to class. Something interesting from Dangote and the Pengassan and Dangote issue. Some will call it, this report calls it Pengassan Dangote rift. Something interesting is happening from there. So let me quickly give other things and then we'll go to class. This is from Nigerian Affairs Journal. Pengassan Dangote rift widen as Dangote refinery stops the monthly salaries of engineers sacked in September due to the refusal of many of the engineers to accept their redeployment to Zamfara, Borno, Benue, and Sokoto states, among others. Some of the engineers who spoke to Punch on the condition of anonymity because of the sensitivity of the issue said individuals were sent to a coal mine in Benue, concrete road construction sites in Borno and Ebonyi states, as well as rice plant in Kebbi, Niger, Sokoto, and Zamfara. While a few workers were said to have accepted the redeployment, many rejected it, relying on assurances from Pengassan. Relying on assurances from Pengassan that the crisis will be resolved through dialogue. It was learned that the Dangote Group issued a warning signal in October by slashing the wages of the affected workers before withholding their November salaries completely. A senior official of the Dangote Group confirmed to Punch, apparently this Nigerian Affairs Journal actually copied Punch. A senior official of the Dangote Group confirmed to Punch that the company would no longer continue paying those who rejected the redeployment offers. While the affected workers described the non-payment of their salaries as victimization. How? How is it victimization? While the affected workers described the non-payment of their salaries as victimization, the official, who did not want his name in print due to the lack of authorization to speak on the matter, wondered why the company should keep paying individuals who had refused the alternative placements offered. Quote, if a newspaper terminates the services of an employee, and if it even goes out of its way to provide alternative employment, but the employee is not interested in availing the alternative employment, will it keep paying his or her salary? The official said. I mean, we don't have to read everything, but here's the point. I mean, I don't know what people were thinking when they joined Pengassan. I don't know. Pengassan. I can't join. You're expecting them to do something for you. This is what is called wisdom. Send them to Borno and different parts. They'll still be in Dangote, but other than Mukakinisi, I think Dangote is doing the right thing, to be honest, as a business owner. There's no sense in paying people that would not want to work in those other places that he has deployed them. So, some people don't like the news, but it is what it is. T.Y. Danjuma, that's General T.Y. Danjuma. We're almost done. He launched the TY Logistics Park, FZE, that's Free Trade Zone, in Alaro City. Is that Free Trade Zone? What's FZE? For some reason, I can't get the acronym out now. Oh no, let me just read what is there. Today, this is from Babajide Sanwo-Olu, the governor of Lagos State. We officially launched the TY Logistics Park FZE in Alaro City, a project that will shape the future of logistics in Lagos and strengthen our position as Nigeria's leading industrial hub. I commend General T.Y. Danjuma retired and Senator Daisy Danjuma for their vision. Through TY Holdings, they continue to show what responsible investment and confidence in Lagos truly look like. This is quite interesting considering that General T.Y. Danjuma recently celebrated 87. It is his 87th birthday. Well, that was just yesterday. No, not free trade, not FTZ, FZE. FZE. So not FTZ. But yeah, I was saying that he celebrated 87 yesterday and launched that new business yesterday. This is how you keep living, right? There's new vision. So congratulations to General T.Y. Danjuma. Also, our own Ooni celebrated 10 years on the throne, and it was fantastic. There was an event with the First Lady. They conferred a chieftaincy title on her. I heard about the drama that happened, but sincerely, I don't think it was a drama. I thought it was tete-a-tete among people that actually know them, or between two people that know themselves. That was between the First Lady, Senator Oluremi Tinubu, and the governor of Osun State, Ademola Adeleke. I don't know why people made a lot of fuss over that. But yeah, that was part of the celebration of Kabiyesi's 10th year on the throne, and he also launched a mall in Lagos. You know, fantastic stuff. And also, they launched the Ile-Ife campus of his university, Ojaja University. There's actually at Ayenkori on the way to Ilorin in Kwara State. But then they launched the Ife campus, you know, over the weekend. So good things are happening, and we're glad to know that our space is developing. Before we leave this news bit, just one more thing, and then we'll bring people up if anybody wants to talk, and then we'll go to class from there. Please, if you're on TikTok, we've got to power tap. That's the only way we can keep this live going. So please, let's power tap. Something somebody sent to me, I thought it's something I should share with everyone. It's quite short, so someone was insulting me in the comment section before the YouTube stuff, you know, went off the other time. And I was going to say, okay, don't worry. When it's time, I'm going to play you a video from one of your brothers and see if this makes sense. Well, let's listen together. Take a listen, please.
Nigeria import terrorists from all over the world. Right now, there are more than 5 terrorist groups that operate in the country today. Ansaru is in Nigeria. Shabab is in Nigeria. Mieti Allah, Nigeria import terrorists from all over the world. Right now, there are more than 5 terrorist groups that operate in the country today. Ansaru is in Nigeria. Shabab is in Nigeria. Mieti Allah operates in Nigeria. Fulani bandits operate in Nigeria. Fulani herders that has been named the 4th deadliest terrorist group in the world by the Global Terrorist Watch of West Africa. These terrorist groups operate in Nigeria, and the government of Nigeria provides an enabling environment for them to try, for them to do their bidding. They provide them with logistics, money, arms, and then they send them to the eastern region of Nigeria to kill my people and to destabilize the region. That is their goal. And that's exactly what they're doing now.
That's a lunatic representing Biafra agitation, whatever the nonsense they are putting all over the place, having a session talking to foreigners who are not Nigerians, telling them about the reality, the so-called reality of Nigeria. And in his lunacy, he said that Nigeria was sponsoring all these terrible organizations, these terrorist organizations, and sending them to the southeast to kill his own people, not telling them that his own people were the terrorists killing their own people. For a group who hates the idea of responsibility and accountability, there cannot be peace in that region. But this is what they go all over the world saying. This was a conference, right, outside the country. Oh, there's Al-Shabaab, there's King Kong. Nigeria allows them to grow and then send them to the southeast because of what? They want to export terrorism. can't take responsibility for what you are doing amongst yourself. There's always somebody to blame. It's a shame. But let's end with something good. Nigeria Records, that's NEPL, that's a company that is associated with NNPC, has recorded its highest oil output since 1989, as the output hits 355,000 barrels per day. And I thought I should share the good news before, because that nonsense, the guys, I wanted to play it at the end, and I'm glad I played it at the end. It's so funny how people just go all over the place. IPOB is literally a terrorist organization. It's a proscribed organization. And those who are always saying that they are moderate but they support IPOB, you know exactly where they're coming from. And if you notice also, all those who were in LP supporting Peter Obi, if you're from the southeast, all of them have moved to supporting IPOB now. Just by every one of them. And I used to say this thing about 2 years ago. If you're in LP, if you notice, folks in LP never spoke against IPOB. Why? They did not want to hurt the Igbos, or they didn't want to hurt their so-called principal. You cannot speak against the evil in the south, because in your warped mind, IPOB is the same thing as Igbos. I don't think IPOB is evil. I in my mind, even till now, I think IPOB is an organization, Igbos and ethnicity. And there's no way you're going to say an organization is the same thing as ethnicity. So if I'm speaking against what's happening, then that means I'm just speaking against everything. It doesn't make sense. But what am I pissed off? Someone would travel all over the world, tell them that, oh, this is in Nigeria, Al Shabaab, Fulani, but you didn't mention IPOB. IPOB is as terrible as those guys, considering what they're doing in that space. But if you like them like that, that's okay. But stop lying on the entire country and destroying Nigeria outside the country. It doesn't make sense. All right. Let's go to class. Before we do that, I don't know if anybody wants to say something. Please come up. Someone says, you were always right. IPOB isn't Igbo at all. I mean, that's what I believe, but to be honest, some people make it look as if I don't even know if I'm right, because many of them, not every, to be honest, many of them just move straight to supporting IPOB. Why should you support that? Why can't you speak against what they're doing if it's wrong? Does that mean you hate your ethnicity? Yeah, it is well what you're writing in the comment section. All right, I don't know if anybody wants to respond to any of these things before we get to the class, to the topic of conversation today. Interestingly, Governor Babatunde, former Governor Babatunde Raji Fashola, has returned to court. He was defending a case yesterday, and there are pictures of him all over the internet. It's quite nice to know that he's still a son, regardless, and so it's also good, so that when you're not in office, you have something else you're doing, rather than folks who call themselves career politicians who are not able to do anything else apart from being in office. And then once they're out, everybody else will moshi. Meanwhile, I can't see anybody coming up, but there's something I found online, and it's good and bad. It's good because people from the southeast are speaking up. It's bad because of the optics. Mumbo, let me see if I can make anything out of it. Like for you, if you can make anything out of it, but I'm going to explain something. I don't want to show this video. It's too bad. You have women, it's actually not too good, to be honest. They are Igbos, and they are, shall I say, protesting, saying they are hungry, there's no food, and people are saying that they're also being attacked by gunmen. Most of what they said was in Igbo, but there's a subtitle here, or an explanation, I should say. I just pray that, someone will help them. The gunmen, they're affecting the people. It's sad. How can you be fighting for a people, but you are the one killing your own people and causing them to go hungry? It doesn't make sense. Anyway, one more thing, since nobody's coming up, one more thing, and then we'll go on. Someone says, can you explain the crude oil part? Let me just play this. Crude oil part. No, okay, so what the news said was NEPL, can't remember the full meaning of the acronym. An acronym this afternoon. It's another company attached, I'm using the word loosely, to the NNPC, and they recorded the highest output since 1989. It was, I think, 350,000 barrels per day. It's not now. People have gone to town saying that that the president was lying, so this is the highest Nigeria has produced. He's not talking about what other oil companies produce. He's talking about what that particular one, NEPL, is producing now per day. In other words, they're able to produce 350,000 barrels per day. That's not to say that we don't have the millions that we had already. I think we have about 1.5 million, between 1.5 and 2 million. So the other companies that are producing oil, the oil producing companies are still doing what they're doing, Shell is doing what they're doing and all of that. But this particular one is now doing better than ever by producing 350,000 barrels per day, which is a huge plus to Nigeria. All right. I was going to play something from Cold Sweat. Is it Cold Sweat or Coleslaw? I think it's Cold Sweat. And I apologize. I'm not saying this to... It's Cold Sweat. Larry Cold Sweat. Let me just play something for you guys. Take a listen, please.
They are the real Hollywood. Yoruba people. They are the real Hollywood. Yoruba people. Okay, sir, let me clear this thing. Does it mean that now Yoruba people have started filmmaking even before things fall apart? Ogun didn't go. It's just at that time when you hear publicity, Ogun they were a legend. I came into Nollywood 1996. My first film with Nollywood was Black Powder. Okay. Maybe in Lagos 44 years. 44 years? Yes. That means what they are saying is true. That because there's this argument going on online that Yoruba people started filmmaking before the Igbo people. Just that the Igbo people documented theirs, but Yoruba people did not document theirs. From you now, it's being confirmed that what is going on is true, that Yoruba people started before us. Okay, fine. Like this podcast, whether you are in China.
I've been hearing this thing about Yoruba people did not document their history. It's people just say these things and oh man, do me. Because there are books on this matter. It's just that there was no social media to push this narrative. And it's how do I put it now? It's irritating, it's insulting for you people to have to say, we did it, for you to now say, oh, so it's true that you did it. When he mentioned Things Fall Apart was even a TV production. I think it was in 1987. It was on television. We're talking about celluloid, you're talking about cinemas. At some point, some of these things just seem very insulting. Someone says, is the AC okay? Nice. Shows the prejudice of the one asking the question. Yes. You've been having plays. I mean, professionally, commercial plays started in the 1940s. And that same period was when Hubert Ogunde got on board. I mean, there are other like Olumegbon, there's some names, like I'll see if I can find those names. I wrote them somewhere. There are people, for instance, who had been in this game long before independence, long before Nigeria's independence. And the crazy part is that the only thing they keep talking about before used to be living in bondage, which was produced in the 1990s, which is a shame, by the way, to be using that to compare that to what we're discussing. It makes no sense. But now they've moved away from using living bondage to Things Fall Apart, which is a TV show, a TV like like a mini series that was produced in 87 for television. We're talking about movies, plays. There was nothing like that. I mean, I don't even know. There's a way it's difficult to say this thing without even sounding insulting, because I feel insulted that you people have to explain. We have to explain these basic things. I found the name I was looking for, Onimole. From Onimole, we had Ogunde, Olumegun, and Akin Okungbe. These were people that got, especially Ogunde, because he commercialized it in the 1940s and made it very big. He used to be a policeman, moved into theater, and we had Alarinjo. Alarinjo originally was about Egungun, right? But you see, them Onimole, them Ogunde, they started having plays in the church. By the way, we're going to discuss that somewhere in our conversation. The film industry and theater industry in Nigeria actually started in the church. The productions. They started with Bible stories like Samson and Delilah, the Garden of Eden. Those are the kind of productions that, even including Ogunde himself, at the time he was still working as a policeman. They were in church staging plays, but it wasn't commercial. And then they decided to make it commercial, and then they brought in the traditional Egungun, Alarinjo, plus the understanding of theater, and began to stage productions. They hit in Lagos, moved around Ibadan, Kaduna, Kano. They went as far as Ghana, went to Benin Republic, of course. Sometimes they even went to parts of the eastern region at the time. They were the ones who did all of this. It was theater at the time. And then later on, by the 1970s, we had Ola Balogun, coming into Nigeria, working with Adelove Afolayan to produce the first indigenous Nigerian movie. That was in the 1970s. It was Kunle Afolayan's father that produced the first Nigerian film, Toje, By Us for Us. There was Palava in the 1920s, that was done by the Brits. I think by European. I saw another movie that was done, I think in the 60s. It was done by somebody in Croatia. It's quite interesting looking at that movie. People like Christopher Kolade were in that movie. But that wasn't by us. The first one, Awalashe for celluloid, was, I think it was Ajani Ogun. And then later on, Ade Afolayan started doing, is it Ija Ominira? And then Baba Hubert Ogunde then moved into filmmaking because it was on stage all this while. Adelove was also on stage. Baba Salah, all of them were on stage. As a matter of fact, before they even moved into movies, they were doing Atoka. Atoka is, I used to do Atoka too, by the way. Atoka is like photo play. So you take pictures of the scenes and the actions, and then you write whatever the dialogue is in front of the characters. That's what they did. You had people, I think when Baba Gebu used to work with Atoka, they used to create all those things, as photo plays, publish it as paper. Of course, the paper itself is called Atoka. It got very popular. Then they moved from there. Of course, you had television in Nigeria. The first place to have TV station is Ibadan in 1959. To even think that there will be a TV station in 1959 in a place, and that it is 1987 that the first film was made in Nigeria, even if we're talking about TV film, it still doesn't make sense. Like, there's some things that people say, just know that they are proud to the point of stupidity. How? You have the first TV station in Ibadan. You have all these traveling theater troops moving to Ibadan so that they could now have slots, right? And then they will be able to get on TV. This is different from the film part though. And then later on, you had a TV station in Lagos. So we had only Ibadan and Lagos for a very long time. What even democratized television was the creation of more states in 76. Where, for instance, an example, I grew up in Ibadan. BCOS, Broadcasting Corporation of Oyo State, it came out of NTA Ibadan. Because now they had to do something just for the states. And then you had OGTV going to Ogun State, and you had OSRC, all of those things came out later. The fact that people just jump all these things and go to 1987 and say things fall apart. Things fall apart, and what does that even mean? How many plays have been done by Baba Salah on TV by our Dakeri Kerry, Ogabilo, and the rest of them? So we've done stage, film, TV, and the only that they're always shouting. The first person two people can claim the credit, but the first person that released his own film was Alade Romire. Folks will say the first person that shot VHS was Big Abbas. But the first one that released, everybody actually went to National Theatre to watch it like they would watch cinema. Just that in this case, they're going to play it from a video player. Was Alade Romire. And that was, I think, 89. And then, of course, the Igbo involvement, interestingly, started with Ajani Yami. Not even with living in bondage. And Ajani Yami came after Shonsho, Meiji, and and Ekun. How do you jump all these things and just be shouting, we are the one because they call us? And I'm glad that Larry Coatsworth actually said what he said, and then the guy was very quick to say, okay, nice, let's go on. Like, no, don't go on. Calm down. If you want to talk about the Eastern region, maybe you can say you are the first people to do it. It's okay. But all this, that's why I don't like, that's why I'm very careful with Nigerian history. Because everything that is yours will be taken away and given to another group just to create the sense that we are one. They will deny you of your history and say another person owns it so that they will, so that everybody can feel. If you don't have it, you don't have it. There's something you probably have that I don't have. So you stick to that thing and then you make something out of that thing. Don't try and take what is mine just so that you can feel comfortable. Like, it makes no sense. But even me asking the question, do you know the work that has been done, like Baba Salah Oromoru, Baba Ogunde, Aye, Jaisimi, Arokwinteniyo. Then you have, of course, Ade Afolayan, taxi driver, Ajani Ogun, Ija Ominira. These people did a lot of work before you guys even woke up. Yes, thank you, Kono Kono. I think Kono Kono is our Dakere. I think it's them, Ogabelo. And by the way, it's also not right. Yes, Moshe Bola, thank you, my brother. Moshe Bola by Baba Salah. I remember this one when I was growing up. I would see I think it was in the maybe late 80s. They had this box. Baba Salah was carrying a box on his head, and you see, vehicles with that poster. At the time, there was no VHS and anything carrying that store. I don't know if it was Oromo or Moshe. I think it was Moshe Bola. People will now reduce everything to we are better than you, we are better than. It doesn't make sense. And there's a lot of work that has been done by forebears, and also it's wrong for people to say that these things were not recorded. I have books, projects that were written. The only problem I think Nigeria has, or that even Yoruba people we have to start fixing, and I'm doing it intentionally. If you notice, I've done it twice, but you may not have noticed. Thesis should not end up on lecturers' shelves in universities, and it's sad that that's the reality in Nigeria. A person will write thesis, do a lot of work, just get the pali, and that's it. Okoma socks, thesis is learning. There was a day I was reading between the ethnic and the national by Remi Adekoya. That was his thesis in the UK. The one I'm reading on the evolution of Christianity is a thesis by Dr. Damola Adesina. It's intentional. Why? Because those things are written for people to learn. Many of the theses that folks write in the US become the books that we buy. A lot of the things about Nigerian evolution of Nigerian theater and film and everything, they've been written. I have a book on African theater that has going all the way back to the Google thing, and it was not published last year, and they've been using it in schools for years. And it's something I also notice with people. Just because they don't know something, they just say, they didn't record it. They didn't record it. That's why. Of course we recorded it. It's just that many of us may not have read those books. But thank God for social media now. We can amplify those things. So we intentionally sometimes bring thesis and read here. And the primary reason is because I feel that if a person has spent time, and it takes a lot to write, I know you know that, whether even if it's your bachelor's degree, thesis for your BSc or BA, master's, PhD, how can you write all these things? You have done all the work looking for solutions, and then everything just end up on the shelves of a professor, gathering dust. How about dusting those things up, making some of those things books. And while those people do their work, if it's necessary and it's important to the conversation, we'll bring them here and also read them out. There are some fantastic things that have been written as thesis. I mean, the book I read the other day, J.F. Adeajayi, Christian. It turned it into a book much later. Ifa and Christianity by Reverend Adegbola. That was his PhD thesis in Bristol. But the point I'm trying to make is that it is not that Yoruba people did not document these things. They documented it. You know, when I was in school, people were doing research on Two-Face. You may not know there are books written on Two-Face, on Plantation Boys. I don't think we really appreciate the work of the academia. That's the sad part, Sha. But there's a huge gap between the town and the gown in Nigeria, right? You could have all the information, but you are just somewhere holed up in the ivory tower. But it's better that we begin to say these things out. So it's clear. No, there's nothing about. There's no reason to even question it. Where did the movie come from? ANTP, National Theatre. Who are the people that actually dominated all these places? Not because of nepotism. This is not like government appointed them. They were all individual companies. They were separate companies pushing their own stuff and using the venue. You couldn't even dream of it. I don't want to tell you why. Because nobody. How can I say this with things that are part of 87 on TV? Television, and whereas television started in Yorubaland about 28 years before Things Fall Apart was made. So you are telling me that in those 28 years, the people in Ibadan and Lagos who spent money to build TV stations would not have thought that they should have plays. And I'm not even talking about Cockroach at Dawn or Village Headmaster. Anyway, that's that about that. I said earlier that theater in Nigeria, professional theater in Nigeria actually began in the church. We don't talk about this enough, and I think it's very, very important to begin to talk about it. So we know the place of the church, especially as a Yoruba person. There's Nigeria, there's Yoruba. So let's localize this conversation. A lot of what we enjoy in Nigeria today began by Yoruba people from the church, sometimes in a way to push back against certain things that they were seeing from the Europeans. And that would be what we'll be talking about. That's what we'll be talking about today. All right. So before we get into today's class, please, if you're on TikTok, let's power tap. Let's keep this live alive. Thank you very much. If you're on YouTube, please like and share the live. We're going to have a nice ride this evening. Let me get my books together. Someone says, remember when Peter Ego was the executive producer of every program on NTA? I think it was a DJ at the time, Abby. I think it was a DJ at the time. That's why sometimes when I talk about Nollywood, I don't like talking about Nollywood. Most times when people ask me questions that have to do with Nigerian films, I will say Nigerian film industry. I'm more comfortable using that phrase than Nollywood, because there is this bastardization that has gone on with the idea that Nollywood began with living in bondage. This one I started in 1992 or 93, which I've been watching movie on VHS, Yoruba films before the living in bondage you're talking about. I'm not talking about cinemas or TV. VHS. I've been watching Ajani Yami, Ekun, all those movies on television at home. But someone will come along and say, and folks should be grateful, by the way. What's on this man that did Ajani Yami? There's N in the name of his company. I think it's NEC or something like that. He worked with Yoruba people and they pushed it together. And the funny thing is that Yoruba people actually acknowledge what he did with Ajani Yami in terms of publicity. Like, he really pushed it well. Someone said Abidjan Baba Ajile. That was television. Abija Kotorun. Koto Ayeda. Wo koto ìjọgbọ́n ọlọ́wọ́n jàre èṣù. Àti èṣù náà. Arilu was Jimaliu, abi? Jimaliu Orishabunmi Fadeyi. That was Arilu. Arilu Yanpanyanrin. Back in the day, tomati bẹ̀rẹ̀ kini excite batteries ló máa ń polówó àwọn kini ẹgbẹ́ yẹn tomati bẹ̀rẹ̀ báyìí gbogbo títì máa dá paro. You have, I mean, the roads will always be silent, and in some parts of kini ìgbà normal long zero. If you know that story, don't worry about it. Títì máa ti dá. Or excite batteries do a group of companies ọgbọ́n bẹ èèyàn wà. Wọ́n gbìyànjú gbà yẹn o. We had no cable TV. We didn't have cable TV. Laide came later now. Laide Tiwani perfume jelly. Ogara Amara don't you Laide Bawo ni Laide Ododoro ni. That was on Sundays. NTA. Then Oshe Kampa Latte. That one was in the 90s. You hear some things on social media, just wonder who these people are talking to. Like they said live yesterday. But it is well. Let's get to class. Please power tap. Oshe ST Mario. You guys are bringing I think ST soap. ST Amiyu. In Ijebu Mushi. Ayan lugba. Kọ́ jẹ́ ká náà rí gbá lò ká má dẹni àná àyàn gbìyànjú. People have really tried. All right. Gbìyànjú àti. So today we're gonna go deeper in our conversation. I don't think I have to repeat everything we discussed before. Excuse me. We're discussing the evolution of Christianity in Yorubaland, part 5. We've learned so far that people like Thomas Birch Freeman moved to Badagry to spread the word of God. We also heard the involvement of the returnees, the Saro returnees. Excuse me. Sorry about that. The Guinea. All right, sorry about that. And thank you for liking the live on TikTok. We're on 34.2k likes right now. Thank you very much. Please don't stop. Let's keep power tapping and sharing the live. From YouTube, on Facebook, we're about to start the class now, so you're coming in right on time. We've been discussing the news all the while, and we had a blast. But now we're going to start with the topic itself. So we're talking about how Thomas Birch Freeman got into Badagry. By the way, from the beginning, we talked about how Christianity first got to what we now call Nigeria, and it was the Benin Warri. Those two places were the first places that, witnessed the arrival of the Portuguese, as documented going back all the way to 1515. And we also read what happened in Benin, what happened in Warri, then what happened in Ife. That some of those Portuguese missionaries were also they also worked in Ife. They traveled all the way, and they were even successful in getting an Oni to become a Christian. We talked about what happened afterwards, how Christianity went down, and then essentially was destroyed based on some things that happened between folks who were into divination and all of those things. Eventually, we talked about how it crumbled, and how it was resuscitated in the 1800s with the arrival of David Hindra who of course had his base in Ibadan, where he was doing the work of missionary, but eventually moved to Ife, did some work, and after a while that work also waned, and then they came much later, and finally they were able to build a church in 1899. But while all of that was going on, the missionaries had now had this, what I'll call a reintroduction of Christianity into Yorubaland in the 1800s, beginning with the move by Thomas Birch Freeman into Badagry, and also the slave returnees who thought it wise to return to their homeland. And they did that because, so what had happened was that there was a Niger mission expedition in 1841 thereabout, but it did not succeed. It failed, right? It wasn't successful. However, it created this desire in the hearts of Yoruba people who were now in Sierra Leone to return to their homeland. And we've said this over and over again. They got to Sierra Leone because they were rescued, on the ships of Portuguese by the British. So England had abolished slavery. Portugal was still carrying on with slavery in the 1800s, and they would take people, from, the west part of Benin or West Africa, and then move them to the New World, particularly Brazil and places like that. And so the ships from England or British ships would intercept those ships and then rescue the people and, settle them in the place called Freetown in Sierra Leone. So a lot of people that began Christianity in Yoruba land were actually Yoruba people who came from Sierra Leone. When you see their names, when you hear their names, you may not be able to quickly decipher that. Because when you start seeing names like Sam Crowther, if you don't have the Ajayi, you will not know. When you start seeing names like John White, some of these names were not people that, even about Macaulay, at the first name, at the second name, most of their names were English. We also talked about how when they returned, a number of them decided to move to Abeokuta. Now, earlier today, I was watching a documentary on Shodeke, and I repeated this before, but it dawned on me, right, that the founding of Abeokuta was too close to the introduction of Christianity into that land. So Abeokuta was founded in 1830. The missionaries started coming in the 1840s. So it was a new town. And Abeokuta is also quite unique in its structure, in its politics. Right? Excuse me. All right. It's quite unique in its structure, in its politics, and in its openness. And so Shodeke, who was the one who took the Egba, and we should also use the opportunity to say that Egba is also unique. I eventually discovered that there are other towns like Egba in that sense, but it's very unique for having 4 kings. Okay, so the 3 Egba groups that moved in, that's the Ake, Bagura, and Okiono. Those 3 were Egba communities, and then later on Owu joined them. Those 4 have 4 different kings, even till today, but the paramount king is Alake. From the name, today we call him Alake of Egba land, but actually Alake Akego, but he's the paramount king in amongst them. So they have a very interesting structure, in Egba land at the time. And so Christians, people like us, dark-skinned Yoruba people, returned to Abeokuta. Of course, they were in Badagry, then from Badagry they moved to Abeokuta. So the first church you see it in Badagry. A lot of the first Dazzle Christianity in Nigeria, Yorubaland, you see in Badagry. But they moved inland and they met with Shodeke. And one of the things that we notice in our study is that a lot of them were European in their outlook. So they would dress like guys, they were like Englishmen in black skin. That's what Oduyoye described them. They were essentially Englishmen in black skin. And some of them, carry that thing with them. So they were Christians, but they were also, you could also call them English people. And that went on for a bit. And then we read from the thesis I mentioned earlier by Dr. Damola Adeshino, where she focused on orature in liturgy, Christian liturgy. I'll just read some things very quickly. Today we're not going to spend too much time on recapping, and I'm very happy with what we've done with the time. So we also read that people began to embrace Christianity. However, there are certain parts of our culture that weren't allowed into the faith. So there was, for the most part, the demonization of everything indigenous, where the songs, the drumming, the music, the dance, things like that will be demonized as being pagan. And so a lot of people will just focus on stuff, and in the bid to be more Christianly, so to speak, they were actually becoming more European. But there was an exception, and it was with a priest in Ota. Let's see if I can find that. Okay, I already mentioned that Thomas Birch Freeman came in 1842. I want to mention, okay, yes, there was a priest at Ota. His name was Reverend James White, and he started introducing Yoruba songs into liturgy, into service, and he called them native airs. But because it was under the jurisdiction of someone Ajayi Crowther allowed him to do it. To be honest, most of the Yorubaland at the time were under the jurisdiction of the Bishop of Sierra Leone. But then the Ota was under Ajayi Crowther. Ajayi Crowther allowed them, to do that. So they were able to begin to, shall I say, experiment with being able to balance their Yoruba identity with their Christian faith. All right. Then we talked about how the demonstrated acceptability of Crowther's authority, the exhibition of the capacity for self-reliance, and the hitherto seeming neglect of the Yoruba Church got the parent committee and the CMS to start discussing the desirability of the Bishop of Sierra Leone transferring his control of the European missionaries in Yorubaland to Crowther. We also talked about how the churches in Yorubaland began to have more independence. I'm going to get to that. I'm going to go to a book by Peel very soon. Also, we talked about how Christians were referred to as Onibuku, not Onibuku, Onibuku, like the book people, because of course people had to carry Bibles everywhere, and it also became a problem for early Yoruba Christians, because they discovered that in order to be able to praise God and worship God properly, they had to read from books. And for them, it was counterintuitive, because they were used to Oricha, they were used to Ijala and Esa and things like that. So that made sense for them to do things extemporaneously. However, folks from that side of town were more into, Christians that were bringing Christianity to Yorubaland, introducing Christianity to Yorubaland at the time, were more about we're more about reading. So Yoruba Christians began to learn to read. And one of the people that helped to teach Yoruba people to read was a man called Henry Townsend. He also moved to Abeokuta. Himself and Bishop Samuel Ajayi Crowther were in Abeokuta. And it was there that the very first newspaper was published. The very first newspaper in Yorubaland, or in Nigeria, patapata, was published by Henry Townsend in 1859. And the paper, of course, we talked about it the other time, is called Iwe Iroyin Fun Awon Ara Egba Ati Yoruba. And I explained that if you look at the original, and I read something here the other day from a paper that was published in 1860. And in that paper, they translated what they really wanted to say in English language, and what they said was a book of information for the Egba people in Yoruba country. So it's not really about Egba people and the Yoruba, it's Egba people in the Yoruba country. In other words, Yoruba country gbogbo beyen, gbogbo le Yoruba, ṣùgbọ́n àwọn Egba ni not feel sorry, because that's where they were publishing it, right? And at the time, it was 120 cowrie shells, which was equivalent to 1 pence in 1859. But people began to buy and began to read, and so literacy gradually came, primarily because of the work of the priest, and also because of people like Townsend, who were informing people. So in there you have Nigerian news and British news, but people were buying from time to time. So we talked about that as well. I want to see if there's any other thing I've not covered. Okay. I'm going to put a finger here and go to another book. Number. I've seen where I'm going. I wonder if I should go somewhere else before I come back here. Just a little, intro, so to speak, from the book by J.D.Y. Peel. The book is called Aladura, a religious movement among the Yoruba. I'm not going to go deep into this book just yet. We'll come back to it later. But I think it's about to read some things here that also has to do with the introduction. Christianity first came to Yorubaland with the visit of the Methodist T.B. Freeman, that's Thomas Birch Freeman, to Abeokuta in 1842. Actually, it came to Abeokuta by the way of Badagry. Soon to be followed by the CMS, who established their mission there in 1843. By 1860, there were stations at Abeokuta, CMS Methodist Baptist, Badagry, CMS and Methodist, Lagos, CMS Baptist and Methodist, Ibadan, CMS, Old Ijaye, CMS and Baptist, Ogbomosho, Baptist. By 1860. Abeokuta and Lagos were the most important owing to the boost given to the churches by the repatriated Saro. As Ajayi has well discussed at some length, these missionaries were all evangelicals. They sought to bring about an individual conviction by Africans of Christian salvation, though this individualism was tempered by the realization that this would need the wholesale reconstruction of Yoruba society. More than is usually the case with evangelicals, they had a plan for society to establish the values of the Victorian Christian middle class, hence their concern for schools, farm institutes, and legitimate trade. Excuse me. Theologically, their main bias is well exemplified in the memorial stained glass window to the early missionaries at St. Peter's Church, Ake, Abeokuta, the earliest established church in Yorubaland. This shows in pride of place at the top of the window an open Bible. Sorry, I think I made a mistake earlier when I said the first church was in Badagry. I think that was a building. There was a church in Badagry, one of the earliest churches. Oh, shoot. It was the first story building. First story building. Badagry, first church, Abeokuta. Let's continue. Theologically, their main bias is well exemplified in the memorial stained glass window to the early missionaries at St. Peter's Church, Ake, Abeokuta, the earliest established church in Yorubaland. This shows in pride of place at the top of the window an open Bible, the Word of God. When 80 years later, Christianity was expanding very rapidly in eastern Yorubaland, a European missionary superintendent described the process as God's Word making great changes. Mambo. Just a second. So there's a lot of things I think will help us, but I'm also looking at time and what we should. Let me read some things that I think is going to help people. I think it's going to help us. The years up to 1915 were a kind, I'm reading Aladura, a religious movement among the Yoruba by J.D.Y. Peel. The years up to 1915 were a kind of heroic age for the missions in eastern Yorubaland. In Ijesha territory, in Ijesha territory, the decade from 1905 to 1914 saw more new foundations than at all other periods put together. The years that followed were for consolidation. We read this kind of thing very frequently in the CMS district reports. Quote, the Olowo of Owo and his chiefs have been attending church regularly, and though we cannot say the work of grace is very deep in their hearts, yet we can say there have been great and radical changes in Owo. owing to their attitude lately. By great and radical changes, it meant the breaking of taboos and the destruction of idols. What the district officer called misapplied religious zeal was a feature of these years. By 1929, the CMS superintendent of Ekiti could say that the days of open persecution were over, though Egungun festivals were still carried on as campaigns against the Christians, and the church had to spread to every corner of Ekiti. Everywhere young men became Christian first. At Ikole Ekiti, a young men's society, a traditional Egbe, angered the Elekole by their refusal to do pagan worship and threatened some elders to become Christian. There is a triumphal note in the Ekiti district reports by the 1920s. Good numerical progress everywhere and a church in every village, but a shortage of workers and money. The place of Christianity in the development of these years can be illustrated from the case of Ado, the largest Ekiti town. In 1893, a certain Christian man, an Ado man, came to Ado from Ibadan with news of the Europeans. The Ewi, that's Oba of Ado, was pleased to hear of peace and sent an elephant tusk to the European commissioner as a gift. And soon after, the first European came to the town. In 1895, the CMS established itself and got land from the Ewi. The preacher was an Ekiti who had been enslaved and taken to Abeokuta, where he became a Christian. I want to read that slowly. The preacher was an Ekiti who had been enslaved and taken to Abeokuta, where he became Christian. Why am I reading this? The idea that Christians took guns and went all over Yorubaland, putting guns on people's head and saying you must belong to Jesus. Yes or no? Say yes. Yeah, a Christian. That did not happen in Yorubaland. Maybe it happened in some people's lands, but that's not Yoruba people's story. Many of the people that even preached to us were those who were freed. Sometimes they were freed abroad, e.g. Sierra Leone and Saro returnees. Sometimes they were slaves within Yorubaland who gained freedom. One day, we'll talk about how feminism or European brand of feminism was appreciated in Yorubaland, even though Yoruba women had considerable autonomy, more than most women in other parts of the world. And when you start reading that thing and you see the line with slavery, because we also had slavery in Yorubaland, right? And some of those people were freed, and some of them eventually became Christians, and some of them became the ones who ministered to the rest. So let me just read that part again. In 1895, the CMS established itself and got land from Ewi. Ewi, by the way, is the title of the king of Ado Ekiti. The preacher was an Ekiti who had been enslaved and taken to Abeokuta, where he became a Christian, Baba Muboni by name. In 1896, Emmanuel Church, CMS, was established, and the Ewi and his chiefs regularly came to services there, though he was angry when told by Baba Muboni to take off his crown in church. The Ewi also ordered his chiefs to send their children to be educated. In 1897, Captain Boa, the peace commissioner, came to Ado to lecture the people on modern improvements and civilization. Of Alade Somi, the Ewi at this time, 1886 to 1910, the local historian says that he favored the young and promised his help to Christianity because it brought progress to the town. He treasured his copy of the Holy Bible and was a regular churchgoer until his people, the chiefs who had been angry at the crown incident, stopped him. When was this? Between 1886 and 1910. They decided to embrace Christianity because, according to them, it brought progress to the town. A lot of churches moved with schools, and so people could read and write. That means they could work with the Europeans. That means that they could bring development to their towns, because now once it quote unquote laju. And of course, people were also very, very, it's called misplaced, what's the word this man used? Misapplied religious zeal. Because in the beginning, a lot of people also did not have a lot of knowledge, where you tell people to be removing their crowns. These kind of things also angered some Yoruba elders, and they were right to be angry. The assertion that he thought Christianity a special juju proves nothing, says the author. For Alade Somi lived and died as a Christian at heart. The next Ewi, but one after this, was Mbo. The next Ewi but one after this was his son, Aladesomi II, from 1936 to date, who was the choice of the youth against the elders. He was previously a clerk in the railways at Zaria in northern Nigeria and had been educated at St. Andrew's College, Oyo, an Anglican. Sorry, please. First one is doing the right thing. First one, thank you very much in the comment section. If you're on TikTok, please power tap, please. Thank you. Where was I? Aladesomi II was the choice of the youth against the elders. He was previously a clerk in the railways at Zaria in northern Nigeria and had been educated at St. Andrew's College, Oyo, an Anglican training college. He was the first Christian Ewi of Ado, and he became king in 1936. In spite of sporadic persecutions, Christianity now had official patronage from the administration and from the Obas. It was clearly marked as part of the new order, and however understood was eagerly taken up by the youth. It will be the way they wrote. Sorry, it's an old book, so sometimes the commas are not where they should be. It will be oversimple to suggest that they wanted education and so in a calculating way decided to become Christian. Rather, sorry guys, I'm having an issue here. I take it slowly. I'm looking for the page and I don't even know where it is. Okay. It would be oversimple to suggest that they wanted education and so in a calculating way decided to become Christian. Rather, these two things were seen as part of an indivisible way of life to which Christian youths aspired, and which was the informing spirit of the progressive unions which were started in the 1930s. And so there's a table here. The following table shows the percentages of the different religious adherents in Western Nigeria. In 1921, there were 10% Christian, 16% Muslim, 74% pagan. By 1952, Christians were 47, Muslim 47, pagan 6. However, don't be moved by the numbers. The traditional religion is of course more important still today than the figure of 6% would suggest. Also, the distribution of the two major religions is not evenly spread over Yorubaland. Muslims predominate in the Oyo areas, which include Ibadan and to a lesser degree Ijebu and Egba, whilst Christianity is strongest in Ondo, Ekiti, and the East. East being Eastern Yoruba, not Eastern Nigeria. So Ekiti is part of the Eastern Yoruba. The Anglicans are the largest Christian group by some way. The impact of the new religions on the Yoruba has been very variable and is to be explained only by a variety of historical and sociological considerations. All right, we're going to come back to this book later. I'm picking from here and there because I'm trying to make a point. I will make that point very soon. The arrival of missionaries. This book is called Christian Missions in Nigeria, 1841 to 1891 by Professor J.F. Adiajayi. The arrival of missionaries at Abeokuta was an event of considerable importance. For the first time, the missionaries found themselves in a town judged to be ideal for applying Buxton's principles. Excuse me. But if we go back just a bit, it talked about, let me go back just a bit just to give us context. I want to read something to give us context. This actually gives us an idea of the political events of the time. So he says, let's start from this place. In March 1846, in alliance with Abeokuta, Kosoko made a combined attack on Lagos by land and lagoon. The expedition failed, but it is important for two reasons. First, it was financed by Domingo Jose Martinez, a Madeira trader and a great rival of the Portuguese and Brazilian traders who supported Kosoko at Lagos. His motive was undoubtedly the commercial concessions that would have been his had he become kingmaker in Lagos. Though he dealt in palm oil and cowries and sold rum and tobacco for cash, he was well known as a slave trader, and his support of Akintoye destroys the simple picture that the Lagos dispute was between slave traders and anti-slave traders. Second, I'm going somewhere with this, please. Second, the failure of the expedition immediately led the Egba chiefs to receive at Abeokuta the CMS missionaries who had been waiting for over a year at Badagry. For in spite of the friendliness of Shodeke, the chiefs had hesitated to allow missionaries to settle at Abeokuta before they had resolved their internal problems. They had insisted in 1845 that the missionaries should wait at Badagry till a new ruler had been appointed in place of Shodeke. But suddenly, in 1846, before such a ruler had been appointed, they gave the necessary permission, enabling Townsend and Crowther to move at once to Abeokuta, leaving Goma on the coast. We already mentioned how both of them got to Abeokuta. And like I said, it's also very close. So Abeokuta was founded in 1830. Townsend and Ajayi Crowther got in 1846. So just 16 years after they settled, after the Egba, and later on the Owu, settled in Abeokuta. The arrival of missionaries in Abeokuta was an event of considerable importance. Not very comfortable. Just 1 second, please. The arrival of missionaries at Abeokuta was an event of considerable importance. For the first time, the missionaries found themselves in a town judged to be ideal for applying Boxing's principles. Born out of upheaval, attuned to welcome new and revolutionary ideas, Abeokuta offered every opportunity for agents of civilization to participate in the work of reconstruction. It was an inland town, away from the swampy coast, connected by the river Ogun to the sea, with roads leading to many large centers of population to Ijebu, Ife, Ibadan, Ijaye, Ketu, Port Novo, and places beyond. What's it saying here? Abeokuta itself, because it was just coming up, was also open to new ideas, right? It was attracting folks from different places to be able to actually come with different ideas to build the place. We should remember this is when we have conversations about Christianity in Yorubaland. And of course, it was also strategically positioned because of the position of Abeokuta. It still leads to many big towns in Yorubaland, whether it's Ijebu or Ife, Ibadan, Ijaye, Ketu, Port Novo, and places beyond. Here, ready to hand was a community of 2,000 to 3,000 Sierra Leone immigrants, mostly Egba, once given up as lost, but now returned with new ideals and skills, and all grateful to the English who had redeemed them. I need to stop here to say something. Now, if 2,000 to 3,000 people returned from Sierra Leone, they were Egba before they went to, okay? And they were now rescued and they returned home. There is no way the understanding they now had, or they had at the time, would not influence the new society that was being built in Abeokuta. Excuse me. So they essentially influenced the new movement in Abeokuta. And of course, they were grateful to the English who had redeemed them, because without the English, they would have found themselves in plantations in Brazil or anywhere else in the Americas. Abeokuta soon became a symbol of the hope of Christian missionaries in Africa, the sunrise within the tropics, as it was called. Efforts were made to clear the sky that the sun of Abeokuta might shine forth and convince Europe that the missionary plan for Africa had every chance of success if well supported, and convince Africans what good things lay in store for them if they followed Abeokuta's example. And that's why you hear the song they sing in Abeokuta saying that Ẹ̀gbá ilé níbẹ̀ ni ìgbàgbọ́ ti ṣẹ̀, ìgbàgbọ́ ti bẹ̀rẹ̀. Àwọn Ẹ̀gbá lọ ní Jésù. They say that because their town is pivotal to the spread of Christianity in Yorubaland, or in Nigeria gone. Because I would say Nigeria, but let's have Yorubaland. And so I wanted to say these things because if you remember now, 1846, 16 years after Abeokuta was established, Townsend and Crowther got into Yorubaland. Abi? 11 years later, Crowther was sent to Onitsha. So it's beyond just Yorubaland. It was also from Yorubaland that Crowther then went to Onitsha in 1857 and then started the mission work there, the Niger mission. So if time permits, we'll get into all of those things. Let's get back to this for now. The work of evangelization went on apace. Townsend settled at Ake, Crowther at Igbeyin. Each built a mission house, a church, and a school. Mrs. Crowther, who was a teacher in Sierra Leone, made special efforts to establish a girls' school. In addition, there were open-air sermons in the marketplace, discussions in the compounds of the chiefs, and the instruction of enquirers in the mission house. The first baptismal service was held within 18 months, 5 February 1848, when 3 women were baptized, 2 of them wives of chiefs, the third Crowther's own mother. That's emotional. Because both of them were taken together, himself, his mother, his sister, and they were separated at a point. Let's not change the topic. I just felt a bit emotional reading that. But let's continue. The first baptismal service was held within 18 months, 5 February 1848, when 3 women were baptized, 2 of them wives of chiefs, the third Crowther's own mother, who was discovered in one of those reunions that made the return of the exiles and the coming of the missionaries such heartwarming affairs. The Methodists, who had been the first to reach Abeokuta, did not wish to leave all the excitement to the CMS. In the absence of an ordained clergyman, Freeman sent a fancy schoolmaster named Mogg, who had served in Badagry under Anir, to occupy the station at Ogbe, till he was relieved in 1849 by Edward Bickersteth, an Egba Sierra Leonean emigrant, who was destined to be the sole Methodist agent there till 1859. When you hear the word Edward Bickersteth, you're not going to say, nah, Egba. The missionary magazines proclaimed the missionaries' successes in conversions and gave accounts of the religious experiences of the converted. In 1849, they related how the first Christian burial provoked persecution, and how persecution called forth loyalty and fervor of faith among the Christians. The importance of Abeokuta in the thinking of missionary circles in England lay, however, not so much in the number of baptisms already carried out, as in the hope of conversions still to come, and in the hope it gave for the civilization of Africa. Soon, Abeokuta became a household word among the readers of missionary magazines, long before Lagos was known. Soon, it even qualified for the honor of Jokes in Punch, that's a magazine in Britain. It became the policy of the missionaries to establish themselves firmly at Abeokuta and foster the civilizing influence, in quote, of Abeokuta down to the coast, to Badagry and Lagos and into the interior. But the true significance of this policy can only be seen against the general background of the advancing interest of Britain in Nigeria. Meanwhile, the emigrants continued to arrive from Sierra Leone, from Brazil, from Cuba. This went on continuously throughout the century. It is very difficult to estimate the numbers of people involved. The Sierra Leone government was supposed to issue a passport to each immigrant, but the records were so notoriously defective that even in 1842, the officer administering the government could only give an estimate of 500, quote-unquote, as near as can be ascertained. In 1844, Governor Ferguson estimated that some 600 to 800 are now established in the Yoruba or Aku country. Since the government was anxious that the figures should not give the colonial office any impression of large-scale dissatisfaction with the conditions in the colony, and since many people did emigrate without passports, these figures must have been underestimated. In 1851, a naval officer who reviewed the emigrants at Abeokuta said there were 3,000 of them. In other words, emigrants were Sierra Leonean returnees. And by the way, from what we've read so far, all this time, Abeokuta was the preferred destination of the returnees, not Lagos. And also, let's remember that when we use the word Lagos in the context of the 19th century, even all the way up until 1967, Lagos was a town or a city, not a state. So every time we read books and you hear Lagos, especially if the book was written before 67 and they're referring to Lagos, the Lagos they're talking about is not Lagos state. The Lagos they're talking about is Èkó, ìlú tó ń jẹ́ Èkó. Those are definitely not Lagos. That's why people tell you that Lagos State was the capital of Nigeria. No, they don't know what they're talking about. Lagos State was never the capital of Nigeria. Lagos, part of Lagos, was the capital. But let's continue. In 1851, a naval officer who reviewed the emigrants at Abeokuta said there were 3,000 of them. So 3,000 people returned from Sierra Leone. By the way, some of them you still have them, and they have all those interesting names like George, like Coker, like Williams, and so on and so forth. Western region, good to see you, Chief. Ẹkáàbọ. All right, 3,000 of them. It was the same figure that Consul Beecroft, who visited Abeokuta earlier that year, mentioned to Hope Wardell. At that date, too, another naval officer referred to hundreds of immigrants at Badagry. There were others at Lagos, Ibadan, and Ijaye, in towns and little villages as far away as Ede, Iragbiji, and Ilorin. 2 years later, immigration from Sierra Leone received a fresh impetus with the establishment of a British consul at Lagos and the monthly mail packets of the African Steam Company. One of the main arguments for securing government subsidy for the mail boat was that it would facilitate communication between Sierra Leone and Nigeria. MacGregor Laird, who secured the contract in competition against Liverpool traders long established on the coast, argued that it would encourage traders in the development of trade in the interior of Nigeria. And he looked to small Sierra Leone traders to take an important share. The mail boats undoubtedly speeded up the rate of emigration, particularly among the mercantile class, who had earlier been reluctant to emigrate. With the advent of mail boats, the Christian missions themselves began to encourage emigration. As the missionaries expanded inland into Yoruba country, many a missionary endeared himself to the local rulers by mentioning how many of his subjects were to be found in Sierra Leone. In other words, when they go to, let's say, the missionary gets to say Oyo, let's say Oyo for instance, so and so number of people from Oyo are in Sierra Leone. When you find yourself, let's say in Ijaye, so and so number of Ijaye people are in Sierra Leone. So that also helps to know that okay, you're not really a stranger like that, because you know our own people where you're coming from. So he says that with the advent of the mail boats, the Christian missions themselves began to encourage emigration. As the missionaries expanded inland into Yoruba country, many a missionary endeared himself to the local rulers by mentioning how many of his subjects were to be found in Sierra Leone and asking him to invite them to return home. In 1853, Townsend mentioned that within 8 months of his writing such a letter for the area of Ijaye, 85 emigrants arrived in town from Sierra Leone. Excuse me, please. In 1853, Townsend mentioned that within 8 months of his writing such a letter for the Are of Ijaye, 85 emigrants arrived in town. In 1854, Hindra and Irving, trying to overcome the reluctance of Ijebu people to welcome strangers, suggested to the Akarigbo of Ijebu Remo that they write a similar letter. It was, however, to the Niger, where there was no spontaneous movement of emigrants, that the CMS was most anxious to influence Sierra Leoneans to proceed and introduce the Gospels. Influential Igbos in Sierra Leone were all equally eager. They petitioned the local committee of the CMS to take advantage of the mail boats to extend Christianity to the Niger, as it had done to the Yoruba country. In 1853, the CMS asked the Reverend Edward Jones, a West Indian principal of Fura Bay, to lead an expedition of 3 Igbos to visit the Niger and report on the prospects awaiting emigrants there. The delegation did not reach the Niger. By the time the mailboat had taken them to Fernando Po, Jones said he was fully satisfied in his mind from conversation with naval officers and others that it would not be possible for them to ascend the Niger and reach Abo unless in a steamer. I don't know if we should go into that, but let's just finish it. He added that Beecroft was of the same opinion and that he directed them to go to Calabar instead, where there was already a sizable colony of Igbos. At Calabar, King Eyo of Creektown declared himself in favor of welcoming emigrants. From then on, immigrants began to arrive in Calabar. A few went over to Creektown, but the majority of them settled on the mission land at Duketown. Again, it is not clear how many of them were in Calabar. In 1856, a missionary reported a dozen families in Duketown. In 1859, 16 Sierra Leone men were listed as having joined the Presbyterian Church. All right. All of this just give us, I'm trying to go back to just give us the, like a broader introduction. Believe it or not, I say discuss introduction. Number. Just one more thing before we go to another book. Let me read something about Ajayi Crowther, then we'll move to something else. Since I already started reading what happened in Yorubaland, I might as well read some of these things. The expedition was talking about another expedition. Let me just finish it, right? The failure of the Jones mission was an added reason for the CMS to join MacGregor-led in pressing the government for a contract like that of carrying the mails for a new expedition to open up the Niger. The travels of Dr. Bath in northern Nigeria and his accounts of the resources of the country made the government ready to cooperate with LED. The expedition went up to the Niger in 1854 under Dr. William Bakey. Samuel Crowther was the CMS representative on it. The expedition reported success in the prospects of trade, in the ready welcome promised to emigrants, and in the absence of any disastrous mortality among the members of the expedition. I have to move very fast. The period of emigration to the Niger had begun. I'm running away from stuff because of time, but I don't think it's going to, what I want to read will make sense if I don't go back a bit. Let me just go back a little. The expedition went up the Niger in 1854 under Dr. William Bakey. Samuel Crowther was the CMS representative on it. The expedition reported success in the prospects of trade, in the ready welcome promised to emigrants, and in the absence of any disastrous mortality among the members of the expedition. MacGregor led with the moral support of the missionaries and of philanthropists in England, therefore redoubled the pressure on the government to grant an annual subsidy for 5 consecutive years to send more pioneering expeditions to trade on the Niger. The reasons I venture upon your lordship to continue the exploration of Central Africa, said led in a memorandum to Lord Clarendon in 1855, are, quote, the scientific and geographical results and the advantage we possess in the colonies of the Gambia, Sierra Leone, and of the Gold Coast, most efficient agents by whose means, by the way, all this while, they've not really colonized Nigeria. I think it's also important for me to mention that the first idea of colonizing or colonization happened in 1861. So at this point, there was no colonization or anything. It was mostly just trade and missionary work. So he says here that the advantage we possess in the colonies of the Gambia, Sierra Leone, and of the Gold Coast, most efficient agents by whose means new life and energy and a higher standard of living may be introduced naturally, unobtrusively, and rapidly into the remotest regions of the interior. To succeed, this return of the civilized African to his native country, carrying English habits and language with him, must be spontaneous and self-supporting. He added that they only required regular and assured means of communication, and they will soon be settling on the Niger. When the subsidy was granted and the 1857 expedition was being fitted out, notices were posted up in Sierra Leone inviting emigrants who could pay their passage to take advantage of the opportunity. More than that, Crowther was again on the expedition, this time with Reverend J.C. Taylor and Igbo and 25 immigrants as schoolmasters and evangelists, who opened a mission station at Onitsha and another at Igbebe at the confluence opposite Lokoja. The period of emigration to the Niger had begun. More will be heard about this later, but it must be said again that this emigration to the Niger, largely inspired by missionary and commercial expansion to the Niger, was different in character from the earlier emigration to Yoruba. as Taylor pointed out in 1866, there is a great difference between those who go to the Yoruba mission and the Niger. The former return to their own home, meeting their parents or surviving relatives, whilst the latter, though descendants of the Igbo or Hausa, are perfect strangers to the country at large. There are only two in our mission on the Niger who are actually sons of the country. I'd like to stop here, but let me just explain the Turenchi we just read. He's saying that the missionary work to Yorubaland is different from what happened in Igbo land or also in the Niger mission. The folks who evangelized Yorubaland were Yoruba people who had gone as slaves and now returned to their own homes to meet with fellow Yoruba people. But the ones who went to do mission work in Igbo land or in Hausa land were not people from that place. And that is why when you have conversations about the contribution of people like Ajayi Crowther and you hear people pushing against it and saying things like, Yoruba people did not do anything, it was Igbo people that did it, it's nonsense. The truth of the matter is this: it was just two of the people that returned that were Igbo, that went into both Igbo and Hausa areas. Most of the mission agents were not from the places, unlike what happened in Yorubaland. That's why I often say, and I keep repeating it, that the idea that certain things happen in a part of the country, you know, in a way for people to become Christians, that because that thing happened there, then it happened everywhere, is not true. Our experiences were different. Our understanding of the faith also was different. We had a different way because the people that introduced Christianity to us were people like us. By the way, I saw a video the other day. Someone was shouting, the Oyinbo people came and took Shango's Oriki and gave it to God. It was not Oyinbo people that did it. It was for us by us. The Oyinbos did not meet people hanging on trees. They met a civilized people who were already civilized. One. When they came, they didn't just come alone. They had people who were willing to actually return home, knowing that there was a way for them to get back home, because the ships were now, at first there was the ships that carried mails, and they were able to pay their fares. They paid their fares to return home. And also the idea that, they were sponsored to go and destroy the Yoruba people so that they can be agents of the mission, of the colonialists. That did not also happen. Listen, if it happened, I would say it. We just say it was bad, and then hopefully we don't repeat it. But it did not happen. A lot of what people project and say it happened in Yorubaland is something that they heard from somewhere else. For us, many of our people were educated and they brought Christianity with them when they returned. And it's important to acknowledge this fact. Now, I think we can move to the part I wanted to get to today. It's 7:06, so we're still on time. I want to start talking about cultural nationalism and how they introduced that thing. Again, this thing we can't rush it. But we're going to read a lot of stuff. So please stay with me. Stay with me. You are all I need. Who knows that song? Who is the darling that will stay with me here now? Because that's the last line. So all of that just to give us an idea of how they came in. But there's some things I want to read. Mfe Karokan pa Ìjàyè àti Ìbàdàn. Ẹ má bínú fún mi ṣẹ́jú kan. But mo kọ kíní sí o. Number. What's it? So, from all we've studied so far, it's very clear Abeokuta was a major base for even civilization, in terms of Western civilization in Yorubaland, and it was like a gateway. It has always been a gateway. See that gateway say they are calling Ogun State. By the way, it's not Nigeria that first used that to Shebilo Washa. Number. enterprise, particularly driven by evangelical societies like the Church Missionary Society, aimed to realize the vision of Christian commerce and civilization articulated by philanthropists like Thomas Buxton. This required penetrating the interior of the country, not just confined to the coast. The initial success achieved in Abeokuta, which was settled by repatriated ex-slaves, Saro, positioned it as the initial symbol of hope, the sunrise within, I read that one earlier, sunrise within the tropics, and the logical base into the interior. The CMS, guided by agents like David Hindera and Henry Townsend, decided that the next necessary link after Abeokuta was not far north, like Rabba in Nupe, but Ibadan, intending for the chain eventually to reach Hausa land. Accordingly, David Hindera went to settle at Ibadan in 1853, while Adolphus Mann was stationed at Ijaye. I'll read something from here. It says here, back to the book by Christian Mission in Nigeria, 1841 to 1891, by Professor J.F. Adeajayi. He says here that the CMS seems to have arrived more quickly at the happy medium, which became a model for the other missions. In 1845, the secretaries had expressed the hope that after Abeokuta, Rabba on the Niger would be the next place to be aimed at. In January 1849, David Hindera, a new recruit from the Basel Seminary, arrived in Badagry with instructions that he was specially set apart for the study of Hausa language, for communicating with the Hausa natives, and ultimately for a missionary visit to the Hausa country. But when Townsend and Goma went to give evidence before the Hot Committee, Hindera was placed. I can't see this thing very well. Hindera was placed temporary. Temporary of course. Hindera was placed temporary to McGill at Anderson. 18 February 1876, UP letter. What they're trying to say basically that when they sent Hindera, it wasn't supposed to be Yorubaland, it was supposed to go to Hausa land. But after the evidence given by Townsend and Goma to the Hot Committee, it was placed rarely at Abeokuta. It was rarely at Abeokuta. It was okay. Let me just continue reading some things. It's an old book. It was there he became convinced that Hausa land must be approached by a chain of missions, and the next link was not Rabba but Ibadan. Townsend went further, and for reasons to be explained later, began to question the enthusiasm to get into Hausa land and do battle with Muslim Emirates when the missionary work in Yoruba still wanted consolidation. He rejected on the one hand too much concentration on Abeokuta, and on the other the idea of a chain stretching in a line. The links of the chain, he said, must not be too far apart, and the chain must stretch to all the centers of population and political power in the region already entered upon. His advice was followed in the Yoruba country. In 1853, the missionaries in Lagos and Abeokuta were reinforced. An African catechist occupied Ota. We read it in the other work. An African catechist occupied Ota, and Crowther paid a preliminary visit to Ketu. By the way, Ketu is in present-day Benin Republic, but it's also Yorubaland. And there are Ketu lands in Nigeria as well, but they're all Yorubaland. Hindera went to settle at Ibadan. Adolphus Mann, another Basel recruit at Ijaye. From Lagos, Goma stationed agents at Igbesa. That's the present-day Ogun State, but they're also Awori. Ikorodu, the Remo, Ofin, Shagam, the Remo too, but was refused permission to go to Ijebu-Ode. From Abeokuta, between 1853 and 1858, Townsend toured incessantly west to Ibara, Ishaga, and Aro, and north to Oyo, Awaye, Iseyin, Shaki, and Ogbomoso, at each of which he obtained grants of land, and as soon as he could, stationed emigrant agents. Emigrant agents would be Yoruba people who were in Sierra Leone who had returned. In that year, two European... Excuse me, please. He's shouting. All right. In that year, 2 European catechists on probation were stationed at Iseyin and Oyo under the supervision of Man. In this way, Townsend's policy was carried out. Man visited Ilorin in 1855 and Townsend himself in 1858. They received a friendly enough welcome from the emir, but no permission was granted to open a station. By the way, when you read Path to Nigerian Freedom by Awolowo, you'll understand why they didn't take Christianity into the north. It was not because the people of the places, of the areas in the north didn't want Christianity. It was primarily because 2 things. Number one, they didn't want to upset the balance they had with the Fulani. They had a plan to get into Nigeria and they wanted to use the Fulani. And the Fulani did not want Christianity at the time. It was a political thing and they stopped the missionaries from going in. And when they told the missionaries to go at first, missionaries said to do Yorubaland first, because as far as they were concerned, if you're going to be preaching the gospel, let's preach the gospel, not be doing power thing where you want to do Ibadan, so do Yorubaland and then do Hausa land. The thing about, say, missionaries were sent by colonialists, that thing is a very simplistic idea of what really happened, and that's what people say a lot on social media, but it's very pedestrian. Now for your change again. Whoa. Excuse me. Two good links are already towards it, but okay, let me go back just a bit. So it says, and now for your change again, 2 good links are already towards it, Badagry and Abeokuta, and I am sure God will graciously hear our prayers and give us Ibadan. Next to that, maybe Ilorin. A 4th and 5th will bring us to the Shard, where we shall shake hands with our brethren in the east. All right, I think there's something I want to say about Ijaye. Motiri. I just wanted to read this thing about Ijaye. I kind of like the story itself. It's something that has to do with Bowen. You know, there's a university in Iwo, now called Bowen University. There's a reason you notice that just about every family in Ogbomoso or in Iwo are Baptist. If they are Christians, they will most likely be Baptist, and it was because of what happened with this. I want to just quickly read something from African Religions, a very short introduction. I'll just read something about it. The American Baptist missionary Thomas J. Bowen arrived in Badagry in 1850, aiming. When local political unrest barred his road, the ruler of Ijaye invited him to settle in that town, which Bowen accepted, making Ijaye his first mission station. This was in the 1850s. The ruler of Ijaye invited him into town. He wanted to go to Igbo, but Igbo, and so he was invited there. I'll see if I can read a few more things about him. I'm trying to establish something. I know it's a bit slow, but it's intentional. I'm trying to establish this thing where we disabuse our minds from the very pedestrian thing of, bye. Someone says, Kurumi still alive at the time. I'm not sure, but I'll check. That's actually the first name I also thought as well. I didn't want to say it because I wasn't sure, but I'll check. Let me read something here from Christian Mission in Nigeria. I'll see the other book later. It says here that let's go back a bit. That's the issue. Thomas J. Bowen, the American Baptist missionary, arrived in Badagry in August 1850. I read that. Having read William de Graft's account of the conversion of old Simeon of Igbo, and it was at Igbo that he wished to establish his first station, hoping in subsequent years to penetrate into Nufe or Nupe, Hausa, and so on. However, his penetration into the interior was barred for the moment by political unrest. He settled at Abeokuta as the guest of Townsend for over a year, learning the language, and getting to know the people both in the town and on their farms. It was then he began to change his mind. He said he observed that the Methodists extend too much and act feebly. The CMS, on the other hand, make their station strong in men and in money and act much more efficient. A feeble attempt is a waste of means. He saw visions of a chain of Christian cities to the Niger, to Lake Chad and Abyssinia. Abyssinia will be present-day Ethiopia. So they're trying to link the chain from Abeokuta, Badagry, Ibadan, all the way to the north and to Ethiopia. But in other words, it was for balancing time with concentration. Failing to get to Igbo, he tried Ketu and Iseyin in turn, but found obstacles in his way. The ruler of Ijaye barred his road to the interior, but invited him to settle in his town. Bowen therefore decided to make Ijaye his first station. He went back to America and returned in August 1853 with 2 other missionaries, Denard and Lacey, and their wives. Almost immediately after, Lacey found himself going blind and had to return home with his wife. Denard was to occupy Abeokuta, having also to maintain communication with the naval packets at Lagos. He obtained the grant of a piece of land, christened Alabama, and started to preach, but his wife died in 1854 and he himself in September. These were missionaries dying. That month, a new missionary, William Clark, arrived to join Bowen and his wife at Ijaye. Together, they established the Baptist mission at Ijaye and Ogbomosho. Bowen had built a mission house and a little chapel at Ijaye and baptized the first convert by July 1854. An American Negro from Liberia, J.M. Harden, joined the mission and established a base for them at Lagos. In 1855, Bowen moved to Ogbomosho and with Clark explored as far as Shaki, Igbo, and Ilorin. Reed, a new missionary, occupied Abeokuta in 1856, and when relieved there by Phillips, another, it is not the work of a when he was relieved by Philip, another recruit, he moved to Ogbomosho and later founded a new mission at Oyo. Thus, on the whole, the expansion of the Christian missions in the period 1853 to 1860, particularly in the Yoruba country, was quite impressive. Please power tap on TikTok. We're supposed to start discussing cultural activism, but I didn't think we had discussed how some of those churches got in. That's why I'm doing this today. But we're going to still get to cultural activism today. So he says, the missionaries began in Badagry and Calabar. Perhaps the most significant aspect of this expansion was the almost total indifference to the political institutions. I'll take that again. Perhaps the most significant aspect of this expansion was the almost total indifference to the political institutions of strengthening the hands of the traditional rulers and using their power to protect and to further the cause of the missions. But the availability of the naval power of Britain was too tempting an alternative. They began to shield behind the navy and in consequence helped to weaken the political power of the states. In the interior, where the navy was not available, their indifference was all the more surprising. They were British, so they also used the power of Britain to be able to push inwards. The only exception, as we have seen, was Townsend's Abeokutan policy. He wrote it as Abeokutan policy. The CMS authorities adopted it and urged it on the British government between 1849 and 1851. The government also accepted it. Other missions began to adopt it. Bowen in 1851 said his present hope is in Abeokuta. The Catholics up till 1864 saw in Abeokuta the key to the interior and the place that could become the center of the mission. But even Townsend saw how inadequate the policy was to provide the political framework for the expansion of the missions. Abeokuta remained internally divided and there was no possibility of its extending its power over Ibadan, Ijaye, Oyo, or beyond. Yet no one proposed an alternative and the missions held on to the Abeokuta policy till the British government rejected it in 1861. That was the same year they began to colonize Nigeria. Now that I've read what I think, I hope when I discuss this, I'll just rush through it. It's what we usually do. We read the books and we just read books and then later on we'll explain. But we don't have to stop to explain anything at the moment. So what I was trying to explain was how, number one, they moved in, right? through Badagry, Abeokuta, worked with our own people. Then some of the Oga at the top were talking about, you're done with Abeokuta, let's go to Hausa land. Like, no, we have to create a chain. So Ibadan, Ibadan was David Hindera, Ijaye was Thomas Bowen, and some of the missionaries that came with them, some of them died. And a lot of the things that people think, it wasn't the government using them, it was them using the government to make sure that their work would prosper in Yorubaland. And we'll talk about the political implications of some of these things, but that'll be much later. Now let's go back to the thesis that we started with, and it will refer us to another book, and that book is what we're going to continue in a bit. According to Peel, so this is the PhD thesis of Dr. Damola Adesina on Yoruba Christian orature and eulogy. According to Peel, this term for, okay, let me go back just a bit. There were collisions, we've talked about this several times, between the Christians and the traditional worshippers, and the Christians and the culture of the Yoruba people. So it says, African Christians became double-edged crusaders of a new culture and despisers of the old. These and other cultural collisions led to a period of protest by a few who found the tension unbearable. This was expressed in what is termed cultural nationalism, a movement between the late 1880s and the First World War that aimed at writing Christianity into Yoruba culture and history. According to Peel, this term, by the way, Peel is J.D.Y. Peel. I read one of his books earlier. According to Peel, this term first occurred in J.F. Adeajayi's seminal article of 1961, titled 19th Century Origins of Nigerian Nationalism, where Ajayi argues that the movement itself had its roots in the missionary movement. In other words, Nigerian nationalism had its roots in the missionary movement. It is the aspiration for cultural independence felt by people under foreign cultural domination. It was a protest against discrimination and social exclusion, as well as the disparagement of their culture and collective achievements. The nationalists began deliberate actions to reassert their dignity as a nation by a new insistence on the worth of what was distinctive to them. This cultural nationalism was expressed in the reversion to the use of traditional Yoruba clothing, names, songs, musical instruments, and dance. They collected the ancestral wisdom of their communities in the form of stories and poetry, such as proverbs, compiled historical narratives from oral traditions, and even started to find merit in some aspects of traditional religion. This found fullest expression in the emergence of independent churches founded by Africans in protest against some feature of the brand of Christianity introduced by the missionary societies. Now let us pause. We're about to dive into something deep. We talked about how the missionaries came. Earlier, we talked about how they work with our own people and how they spread Christianity. We also talked about how, as we were spreading Christianity, they were also spreading English culture. People would dress wearing suits, they would wear tie. Never mind the sun and the heat. Everybody had to appear British. They were going against Yoruba culture, Yoruba tradition. Sometimes, and I think we still make that mistake today, there are things that we assume, there are things that we assume to be religious that are basic cultural expressions. And like I said the last time, it looks like both those of us who are Christians could assume that everything that is... I've moved away from the Bowen thing. I already made the point I wanted to make, but we'll come back to that maybe on Friday. Tomorrow we'll be here by 4. We discuss Christianity in Yorubaland. Christianity has been in Yorubaland for 500 years. That's our topic tomorrow. But let me just finish this part. People had mistaken the idea of Christianity for becoming European. So you had English names, you spoke English, you wouldn't want to prostrate because you're wearing a suit. You wear suits, you dress English. You get to words. By the time we get to the book by E. Ayondele, the book is called The Educated Elite in Nigerian Society. That's the next topic we're going to after this series. What the returnees did. Some of them he called the deluded hybrids. That's the word he used. That's the phrase he used. I don't think they were. I mean, in a way, they were, to be honest. They didn't know where they belonged, whether they were English or whether they were Yoruba people. However, in the midst of all of this craziness, something began to germinate. And it is what J.F. Adeajayi, professor, calls cultural activism, where we began to say, listen, we can be Yoruba and still be Christian. And I was saying earlier that there's a mistake that folks make. Those of us who are Christians could assume that everything we see that's cultural is spiritual, is religious, and it's, it has, maybe it's even demonic. That's wrong. But the converse is also true. Folks who are traditional worshippers also look at everything that is cultural and say it's mysticism, it's mysterious, it's our own, it's spiritual. It's also wrong. Many of the things are not even that deep. Are there deep things there? Yes. The reason people say everything is deep is because they are ignorant of what they're discussing on both sides. The ones who say everything is demonic is ignorant of most things. The one who say everything is deep and spiritual is ignorant, doesn't know jack. So both of them are only pushing back based on their ignorance, not based on knowledge, which is a shame, considering that we have the opportunity to learn. So knowledge helps you to shift these things, and you can say this is cultural, this is religious. And those two things are easy to separate for the most part. I mean, there are times when it's difficult, but for the most part, it's easy to actually delineate and say this one is cultural, this one is religious. And just because you are a Christian doesn't stop you from observing the cultural aspect. I was watching a video earlier today. I don't know if I can find it. I think I should find that video because it will help me to even take a break. It was a Muslim man who was talking to, I'll see if I can find that video. He was talking to his people, he was preaching to them whilst in Anshe. He was telling them how some people have told them not to prostrate anymore because they are now Muslims. And he was asking how exactly does that even affect their faith? Moriko, Mejini. I'll play the first one. I'll find the second one while the first one is playing. Or maybe are they two in one? Let me play the one I found. Gives you an idea what I'm trying to say. This is a Muslim. He's a popular Islamic preacher. Okay. Bro.
kọ́mọ á dúró gbangba kó táyà sí bàbá rẹ̀ báyìí gbogbo ọ̀kọ́kùkọ tí wọ́n kọ́ wọn ni ẹ fi da ayé rú ẹ fi da àwùjọ rú kò wá sí ipò lójú àwọn ọmọ mọ́ kò sápẹ́lẹ́ lọ́dọ̀ wọn mọ́ wọn ẹ̀ máa fà wọn ẹ̀ mẹ́yì àpọ́nlé tó ń bẹ fáfá tó kọ́ wọn mọ́. kọ́mọ á dúró gbangba kó táyà sí bàbá rẹ̀ báyìí gbogbo ọ̀kọ́kùkọ tí wọ́n kọ́ wọn ni ẹ fi da ayé rú ẹ fi da àwùjọ rú kò wá sí ipò lójú àwọn ọmọ mọ́ kò sápẹ́lẹ́ lọ́dọ̀ wọn mọ́ wọn ẹ̀ máa fà wọn ẹ̀ mẹ́yì àpọ́nlé tó ń bẹ fáfá tó kọ́ wọn mọ́.
So the other video, it was talking about respect for parents and prostrating. And there are certain Islamic teachers, again, this is not an attack on any religion, so this is not the platform for Eleyoda. I'm a Christian, by the way, proudly so. But I'm Yoruba, proudly so. And the point he's making is that certain people have been taught not to prostrate to greet their parents. That's the beginning of what he was saying. That they were taught not to respect their parents, not to prostrate because of some religious observances or whatever. And that has now, affected the ability to respect the elders, respect their parents, even respect their affairs, according to him. In other words, they're not even respecting their affairs. Yoruba people would respect and want to. So the point really is that there are people who can go to the extremes and try to make something deep or spiritual or demonic, whatever it is, out of basic cultural practices. And it's important that we don't make that mistake. Now, the doctor referred to 19th century origins of Nigerian nationalism, and that's what we're going to continue right now. I'll find that book. It's somewhere here. Oh boy. I know we are traveling to different things. We are entering to different things. Don't worry. We're going to tie everything together, you know. But like I said, I could come and just talk and say, oh, this is what I know, this is what I know. But I think that it's more respectful, if you don't mind, or it's easier to make one's point. Rather than just come around and come and flex and tell you what I know. If we read together, you know exactly where I'm coming from. So when I start referring to those books, it becomes like, oh, okay, that's the book, we read it together. Okay, so that way is as if we are. It's not even as if we are literally studying together rather than just throwing thoughts at you. Okay. Now let me find that book. "19th Century Origins." By the way, it's not a book. It's an article in a journal. If you give me a second, I'm going to quickly get it. Thank you, Lord. By the time we're done, the goal of all of these things is that we appreciate being Yoruba, and that whatever it is that you choose to worship or not to worship, you will not, number one, you will appreciate what people have done and not just assume that people just came and started destroying everything and they are not Christians, they're just when people came to do something. You appreciate the work that certain people have done. It will help us to grow. All right. Umbo, can you see fresh technology meal? Oh, excuse me. Great. This article was published in the Journal of Historical Society of Nigeria in December 1961. 19th Century Origins of Nigerian Nationalism by J.F. Adeajayi. James Coleman, in his recent study, by the way, a lot of reading will happen tonight, even though we have about 20-30 more minutes, and they will continue on Friday. Tomorrow, Christianity has been Yorubaland for 500 years. Listen to that together. We'll read more of these things later. So, we'll now go back to the book by J.D.Y. Peel on Aladura, and that's when we'll now begin to establish how the Yoruba indigenized Christianity. So much so that it took on a new form. It was still Christianity in essence, in everything, but the expression became distinctly Yoruba. But I want us to do this thing about nationalism before we go into that. Well, I'll do a little bit. We'll go into that, then we'll come back to this. Then from here, we'll now go to Ayodele's book. Check my plan. But we'll unravel everything. All right. 19th Century Origins of Nigerian Nationalism by J.F. Adeajayi. Let's get into this. James Coleman, in his recent study, Nigeria, Background to Nationalism, distinguishes between traditional and modern nationalism in Nigeria. Traditional nationalism, he says, includes movements of resistance to initial British penetration and occupation. This was written a year after independence, so remember the context. All right. Traditional nationalism, he says, that's James Coleman, includes movements of resistance to the initial British penetration and occupation, early revolts provoked by the imposition or operation of alien political or economic coercions. Modern nationalism, he says, includes sentiments, activities, and organizational developments aimed explicitly at the self-government and independence of Nigeria as a nation. Take that again. Modern nationalism, he says, includes sentiments, activities, organizational development aimed explicitly at the self-government and independence of Nigeria as a nation state on the basis of equality in an international state system. What is he saying here? Traditional nationalism is what you will see in American independence, leading to America. The fight between America and King George and England all of that is traditional nationalism, where it includes movements of resistance to the initial British penetration and occupation, early revolts provoked by imposition or operation. All those things. You saw it also in China, with the Opium Wars. All of that to be traditional nationalism. But modern nationalism essentially has to do with sentiment, all right? Activities, organizational development aimed explicitly at the self-government and independence of Nigeria as a nation state on the basis of equality and an international state system. That's what we did. We did the modern one, not the traditional one. So people say that's what actually moi, maybe. He goes on to say that the earlier traditional nationalism was probably just as intensely nationalistic and anti-European as the modern nationalism, and that no clear line can be drawn between the two. No sharp line can be drawn between the initial resistance to the establishment of British authority and later protests or revolts against specific administrative actions which Africans deemed offensive. In a review of Coleman's book, I have suggested first that a clear line ought to be drawn between the two movements described here. That properly speaking, the movements led by people like Jaja, aiming at the preservation of the old order in Nigeria, though intensely patriotic and a sort of inspiration to later nationalists, were not in fact part of the nationalist movement. Secondly, I have suggested that Nigerian nationalism is not just a protest movement against specific administrative actions of the British government, that rather Nigerian nationalism antedates the establishment of British rule in Nigeria. This is a very profound statement, by the way. I've got to highlight it. Nigerian nationalism antedates the establishment of British rule in Nigeria and has a positive, constructive objective that goes beyond self-government. Its objective, as Coleman rightly says, is the creation in Nigeria of a nation state that will be able to take its place on the basis of equality in the international state system. It is largely to explain this point of view, which I consider essential for understanding the true nature of Nigerian nationalism, that I have thought it important to trace the 19th century origins of the nationalist movement in Nigeria. What is he saying here? He's saying that what we call Nigerian nationalism actually predates the establishment of British rule in Nigeria. What does that mean? The terminology just means basically is that the seed for the nationalism that we call Nigerian nationalism began before colonization. Before the British colonized Nigeria, the seed of Nigerian nationalism was already planted and already started growing, and it grew, according to what we read in that other book, as cultural activism among Yoruba people in the churches. But we're going to let's not rush ahead of ourselves. Let's just go gradually. He says, I consider essential. It is largely to explain this point of view, which I consider essential for understanding the true nature of Nigerian nationalism, that I have thought it important to trace the 19th century origins of the nationalist movement in Nigeria. I'm rushing very fast. Let's go on. It is essential to remember that the revolution initiated in Nigeria by the forcible establishment of British administration in the last decade of the 19th century had been preceded in the same century by two other revolutionary movements, one Muslim, the other Christian, each aiming at the reorganization of social, economic, and political life in the country. The first of these movements, the Fulani Jihad, introduced into Nigeria the concept of a state transcending the bounds of personal loyalty to a clan, a traditional ruler, or particular locality. A state seeking unity rather within the embrace of a common religion. In other words, that's what the Fulani people gave to folks in the north. A state seeking unity rather within the embrace of a common religion. One of the motives behind this movement may have been the desire to bring the peoples of Nigeria into a state which could rank on a basis of equality with other civilized nations of the Muslim world. On the other hand, the Fulani Jihad definitely eschewed the idea of a nation state. In contrast to the secular, westernized, and nationalistic tendencies in Egypt and Tunis in the 19th century, the ideal of the Fulani Empire in the northern Nigeria was to recreate in the western Sudan the old unity of the Dar al-Islam, the Muslim community of the time of the caliphs. The values of the empire were ecumenical values and precepts of the classical period of Islam. Thus, we cannot find the roots of modern Nigerian nationalism in the Muslim revolution. I'm rushing. What is he saying? I'm sure you are getting it, but just in case people didn't get it because I was rushing, what he's saying basically is this. There were two movements that predated or that birthed Nigerian nationalism. and both of them were religious, one Christian, the other one Muslim. And except for the Muslim, you see that in what the Fulanis did in the north. And you could argue that they were trying to build a state, right, that would be able to compete with other nations, states in the Muslim world. But in reality, it was as if they want to recreate what was in Western Sudan, which is called the old unity of the Dar al-Islam, the Muslim community of the time of the caliphs. And you see it in the jihad. And I've said it several times, jihad itself, the jihad of the Fulani, is not a political, it wasn't a religious jihad, it was political. It would take a person who doesn't really think deeply to be making everything religious when it comes to discussions about Islam and how Fulani gained entrance, whether it was in the Hausa land or even in Ilorin. It was political and it was ethnic. There are three things you can look for in that movement of the Fulani, starting with Usman Dan Fodio. You can also see the same thing in what Alimi and his son Abubakar did in Ilorin. There's religion, there's politics, there's ethnicity. But the overriding kini was ethnicity. And if you don't see it, when we have that session, we'll discuss it. But again, when we get to that point, it's not to say Islam is kini, it's just to explain how that thing influenced political evolution in different parts of Nigeria. So he says we cannot, looking at it the way it was, we cannot find the roots of modern Nigerian nationalism in the Muslim revolution. By contrast, the revolution initiated by the Christian missionaries, though less powerful and less extensive in its immediate effects, was more far-reaching in its ideas. This was largely because it pointed to the future rather than the past. It was much nearer in spirit to the revolution introduced later by the British officials. The revolution which at the end of the century came to swallow up both the Muslim and the Christian revolutionary movements. In particular, the Christian missionaries introduced into Nigeria the ideas of nation building of contemporary Europe. They also trained a group of Nigerians who accepted those ideas and hoped to see them carried out, and later began to use these ideas as a standard by which to judge the actions of the British administration. In doing this, the Christian movement sowed the seeds of Nigerian nationalism. It is essential to bear in mind not only that this preceded the establishment of British rule, but also that it was undertaken in the belief that direct British rule was unlikely, and that whatever social, political, and economic changes were considered necessary in the country would have to be achieved by encouraging a new class of Nigerians themselves to reconstruct their own environment. Undoubtedly, the Christian missionary societies who worked in Nigeria in the 19th century, the Church Missionary Society of England, the Western Methodists, the Scottish Presbyterians, the Southern Baptist Convention, and the Catholic Society of African Missions of France as a whole sought to encourage their words ultimately to create in Nigeria one or more states in the image of contemporary Europe. And the ideal of European nations they presented to them had three essential characteristics. First, European nations were Christian. Secondly, they were civilized in the technological sense of the Industrial Revolution. In particular, they had the marvels of steam power and railways. Thirdly, petty state had long given way to larger, more powerful units. And whereas in Greece, Germany, and Italy, this development was a little delayed, nationalist movements were already creating the larger units required for the full development of commerce and technology. The missionaries had these developments at the back of their minds, and they urged them on their words, largely because they could not conceive of Christianity flourishing in a social or economic or even political environment that differed in essentials from the European environment. Well, the missionaries were not always clear as to whether this social and political environment would be the result of the introduction of Christianity or whether it must be its precursor. But they had no doubt that the two must go together. Hence, they advocated not just the introduction of Christianity, but also the abolition of both the overseas and the internal slave trade, and the development of what they called legitimate trade in new agricultural products to take its place. Christianity, commerce, and civilization, they often said, must go together, just like we read in the other book with Buxton. These three, working together, they believed would produce such nations as they had in mind. They did not think of themselves actually building the nations. There was no attempt to build theocracies like the Jesuits in the 17th century South America. They sought the cooperation of European traders and European governments, but until the time of the scramble for Africa, they realized that the support they could get from European governments was limited. They therefore aimed only at initiating the revolution, raising up churches and training local men who would themselves build the new nations. Hence, the emphasis on education and on raising a local staff, a local body of educated Africans. This emphasis was to a large extent due to the practical problem of the high rate of mortality among Europeans in West Africa, e.g., mosquitoes, malaria, and consequently to some amount of uncertainty as to the whole future of Afro-European relations. The missionaries argued that if Christianity would take root permanently in Africa and not be wiped out like the earlier attempts of the 16th century and 17th centuries like we discussed in Benin, Ife, and Warri, it was essential to train local people quickly to aid and eventually to replace European missionaries. But this could not be done in isolation from the rest of society. It was essential, but not enough, that such people trained should be able to read the Bible and to write. They must also be able to make Bibles, and that involved printing presses and something of the technology of Europe. And thus, from the practical need of providing African missionaries and auxiliaries, the European missionary societies began to think in terms of raising up an African middle class on the lines of Europe and America. This would be the men to carry through the revolution initiated by the missionaries. As General Secretary of the CMS declared in 1857, quote, "We hope that by God's blessing on our plans, a large body of such native growers of cotton and traders may spring up who may form an intelligent and influential class of society and become founders of a kingdom which shall render incalculable benefits to Africa and hold a position among the states of Europe." That was General Secretary of CMS in 1857. This was before colonization, by the way. The rise of such a class of educated Africans was the greatest contribution of Christian missions to Nigerian nationalism. The first generation of this educated middle class were trained not at home in Nigeria, but abroad in Sierra Leone, Cuba, and Brazil. A few of them were descendants of slaves, taken a long time before from different parts of West Africa, and only came to Nigeria as strangers to take advantage of new opportunities offered by the missionaries. Most of them, however, came back to Nigeria because they still remembered that they or their parents were born there, for they were generally the very people or the children of the people enslaved in the wars of the early 19th century, resulting from the southern extensions of the Fulani Jihad and the consequent breakup of the old Oyo Empire. Some reached Cuba or Brazil, managed to secure their own emancipation, and undertook the Azados journey back. Majority of them were among those rescued by the British Navy and settled in Sierra Leone as freedmen, and when they began to trade down the coast, they soon realized that they were not too far away from home. By 1839, some of them began to ask to be repatriated or to arrange their own transport back. By the 1840s, this became something of a mass movement. Excuse me, we talked about this already, right? But I think it also makes sense that it's been repeated. 1 second, please. So by 1839, some of them began to ask to be repatriated or to arrange their own transport back. By the 1840s, this became something of a mass movement. And you see that there's another book, maybe one of these we'll discuss it, by the same author, J.F. Adiajayi, called The Age of Bishop Crowther. We'll talk about that later. The missionaries likened the return of these men to the return of the Jewish exiles from Babylon. We may liken it to the return of ex-servicemen of our day, of our own day. Umbo, I need to do something quickly. Okay. The missionaries likened the return of these men to the return. Please, if you're on TikTok, please power tab. Let's try and get to 100K, please. This thing is also showing Amber Alert. I hope I'm sure you're enjoying what we are reading, but let's keep it going. Let's keep it alive, and we can only do that by power tapping on TikTok. If you're on YouTube or on Facebook, thank you for being here. Please like the live and also share. But TikTok, we are the host community, so power tap, please. Thank you. The missionaries likened the return of these men to the return of the Jewish exiles from Babylon. We may liken it to the return of ex-servicemen of our own day. Some of them went back to their towns and villages all over the country and were easily absorbed back into the old society. But most of the others, even though they maintained contact with their relations, gathered at a few focal centers, where European missionaries and the advocates of legitimate trade gave them encouragement, scope, and opportunities. Abeokuta and Lagos were the two most popular centers, but significant numbers were also to be found at Calabar, Bonny, Ibadan, Ijaye, Onitsha, Lokoja, and other centers up and down the Niger. Trade and missionary employment dominated their lives. Most of them were not highly educated. Many, especially those from Cuba and Brazil, had however learnt some very useful trades and skills. Many of them could read and write in a foreign language. Those from Sierra Leone in English, those from Cuba in Spanish, and those from Brazil in Portuguese. The most important factor in their makeup, however, was that in passing through slavery into freedom, Mumbo. Thanks for staying tuned. Let's continue. So he said that Abeokuta and Lagos were the two most popular centers, but significant numbers were also to be found at Calabar, Bonny, Ibadan, Ijaye, Onitsha, Lokoja, and other centers up and down the Niger. Trade and missionary employment dominated their lives. Most of them were not highly educated. Many, especially those from Cuba and Brazil, had, however, learned some very useful trades and skills. Many of them could read and write in a foreign language. Those from Sierra Leone in English, those from Cuba in Spanish, and those from Brazil in Portuguese. The most important factor in their makeup, however, was that in passing through slavery into freedom, they had all been acutely conscious of the gaps that separated them as a people from the Europeans. And in spite of having been subjected to Europeans, or because of it, they wished to be like Europeans. They had all traveled far. A few of them had traveled widely and had been something of the and had seen something of the European world, either in Europe itself or at second hand in Sierra Leone, the West Indies, or Latin America. By and large, they all came back desiring to make certain changes in the land of their birth, or just hoping to see the changes come about. As a Methodist minister said of those leaving Sierra Leone in 1841, they desired for their country, quote, that the gospel of our God... I'll take it again, please. As the Methodist minister said of those leaving Sierra Leone in 1841, they desired for their country, quote, that the gospel of God our Savior may be preached unto her, that schools may be established, that Bibles may be sent, that the British flag may be hoisted, and that she may rank among the civilized nations of the earth. They were the first generation of Nigerian nationalists. The nationalism consisted in their vision of a new social, economic, and political order, such as would make their country rank among the civilized nations of the earth. There was no Nigeria at this point, so nation to them, either you say cities or ethnicities. So maybe I want Abeokuta to be great, or I want Oyo to be great, or I want Yorubaland to be great. That was not like Nigeria at the time. So they were returning to have in Yorubaland what they had, or what they had seen, whether in Latin America, in the West Indies, or in Sierra Leone. They were the first generation of Nigerian nationalists. So we're using the word Nigeria here, not because Nigeria existed then, but because where they were, or where they returned to, is now part of Nigeria. The nationalism consisted in their vision of a new social, economic, and political order, such as would make their country, quote-unquote, rank among the civilized nations of the earth. Two features of this nationalism should now be noticed. One was that it was not specifically Nigerian. Nigeria did not yet exist as a political unit. The existing political units being considered too small, there was in fact no political unit with which the nationalism was identified, and there was not even a national language to give it impetus. Some did think of those who spoke a language, particularly Yoruba, Hausa, Kanuri, or Igbo, as providing a basis for the new nation. But But it was not language but racial consciousness that gave impetus to the nationalism. Therefore, more usually they refer to the African race as the basis of the new nation. But since they knew only a part of that Africa, it was the part they knew, that is to say West Africa, that they usually had in mind. The dispersal of the people from Sierra Leone to different parts of West Africa, the Gambia, Gold Coast, Lagos, the Niger, Calabar, Fernando Po, Victoria, gave rise to a class of educated Africans with relations all over West Africa, thus giving a certain reality to West Africa as the political basis of their nationalism. The nearest approach to the Nigeria of today was to be found in CMS circles because the mission field cover Yoruba, the Delta, and the lower Niger and Benue. And many people thought of the mission fields as the likely basis of the new nation. For the same reason, nationalism tended to be less pronounced among those who worked in restricted fields that did not cut across the existing political units, the best example of this being the Presbyterians in Calabar. So he mentioned what I said, but then he expanded to West Africa. I think there's a point in that, but I don't really agree with the conclusions personally. I don't agree with that conclusion because when they returned, they were not trying to change West Africa. They were trying to change their own part of West Africa. So if you say Africa is big and West Africa is smaller, they had left Sierra Leone. They were not trying to do something in Yorubaland and something in Sierra Leone or in Freetown, so to speak. Or well, called Sierra Leone at the time anyway. To do something here. So you can assume that they were West African in their outlook, but in their work, I think they were more ethnic. Or you could say they were based on cities, like I said earlier, cities and ethnicities. Right? Because of course that was the base of the political identity at the time. So you talk about, and even till today as Yoruba people, that's how we think. We think in terms of cities and in terms of ethnicity. So what that means basically is this. You know, I was watching, let me take a pause please. I'll come back to this in a bit. I was watching a show yesterday and somebody said, and I was talking to, you know, my boys. I was like, there's nothing like Ara Oshun. Oshun is not a place. Oshun is a river. You can say Ikmele Oshun, but even that one is not as deep. If you want to talk to people from that place, you mention their towns. Because state is a recent creation. Oshun State was created in 1991 or so. Although there was Oshun province inside the western region, and there was, you know, but when you say Enyara Oyo, which Oyo are you talking about? So you say Gbogbo Eyin Oyo Atawon Ibadan. Okay. Which Oyo are you saying? You can't say Gbogbo Eyin Oyo Atawon Ibadan. Because there are three different types of Oyo. There's Oyo town, there are Oyo people, which is a subgroup of Yoruba people, and then there's Oyo state. But generally when you say Oyo, depending on the context, most likely you're talking about the town. So, for instance, the Oyo town, well now it's in Oyo state as well apparently, but then there are Oyo people, and Oyo people are not just in Oyo state. There are Oyo people in Osun state. And get to Odeomu, Tonkere, Modeke, those are Oyo people that moved after the Oyo Empire fell. Okay? If people are not just in Ife town, you see if people in Ekwetumoju, you see if people in Edwambon, all those places are also part of Ife. So the point I'm trying to make is that Yoruba people think in terms of cities, the city of origin or town. I'm using the word city because I like the rhyme. The city and the ethnicity, and the idea basically is Ife, is Yoruba, is Oyo, is Yoruba, is Ijesha, is Yoruba. Even Ijesha Tomoso Egon, Ijesha Toporishirishi, Ijesha, okay. But they can mention Ijesha as a people, even though they're talking about the town, it will not matter. But when you start saying things like state, I see a lot of people doing it these days, but it's not right. You can't do that. And it has far-reaching consequences, by the way. E.g., if you're talking about what you are doing in your state, maybe benefits that accrue to indigenes of your state, I get it. Excuse me, so you say Lagos State indigenes, that's okay. But if you're talking about the people for cultural purposes, you can't be talking Lagos State. I mean, when I say cultural, I'm not saying there are cultural events in Lagos State too. I'm saying when it comes to okay, that's the word. When it comes to identity, because there are people in Lagos State whose cousins are in Ogun State and they're in the same subgroup. All right. If you want to do something in Ekpe, there are things that you may want to do in Ekpe, and you have to get authority from Ijebu-Ode. Why? Because Ijebu-Ode is the capital of Ijebu people, and Ekpe are Ijebu people. But Ekpe is in Lagos State, where Ijebu-Ode is in Ogun State. You see, Awori is in Lagos State. We mentioned Igbesa earlier. Igbesa is Awori land, but it's in Ogun State. Ikorodu is in Lagos State today, but it's connected to Remo. So all these things help us to understand that while we can use state because of administrative convenience that Nigeria has done following the British example, we must remember the traditional base of our identity, which is where we come from and then who we are as an ethnicity. So you are Ibadan and you are Yoruba. And that's why if you notice all our towns, well, most of our towns that I know, and I know a number of them, have anthems. And then the state also have anthems. So you can go to one state in the southwest and might be coming out with like 10 anthems. That's how we do it. This is how we do it. You have the state anthem, and you have the one town's anthem, another town's anthem, another town's anthem. Anyway, I was using that to take away from reading. Let's go back to reading now. This is how we do it. All right, back to the paper by Professor J.F. Adeajayi. By the way, when I read these things, I can also tell you what I think. So it's not just that everything that this part is not what they said, is what he thought based on what he observed, and he's right to an extent, but I also think there's another part of it, and that's why I was explaining the way I did. With all due respect to the professor. The second feature of this early nationalism was that, as the Methodist minister quoted above put it, the nationalists desired that the British flag may be hoisted. What did the Methodist minister say? Let me just go back to that very quickly. As the Methodist minister said of those leaving Sierra Leone, they were Yoruba people leaving Sierra Leone in 1841, they desired for their country, quote, that the gospel of God our Savior may be preached unto her, that schools may be established, that Bibles may be sent, that the British flag may be hoisted, and that she may rank among the civilized nations of the earth. So back to this. It says the second feature of this early nationalism was that, as the Methodist minister quoted above put it, the nationalists desired that the British flag may be hoisted. Excuse me. This meant not that they wanted their country to be annexed as such, and as they came to realize the full significance of annexation, they did not want it, but that they actively demanded European support and tutelage. It should be remembered that, to begin with, for most of them, especially those from Sierra Leone, the typical figure of the Englishman was that of the kindly naval officer who broke their chains, or the benevolent missionary who put them through ABC, took an interest in their education, and later employed them as catechists or put them in touch with English business houses with whom to trade. I want to stop here and explain something that I don't think a lot of people that criticize Christians and our elders understand. I said it before. I want to use what he said here to explain it. These people were taken from their father's land, sold as slaves, traded with the Yorubaland, eventually put on ships to be taken to the New World. Their ships got intercepted by English ships. The English naval officer becomes the ideal man. That's the person that gave him freedom. You may hate him and speak English. It doesn't matter to the man who was rescued by that naval officer. And that man brings him and introduces him to the missionary, who teaches him how to read and write. And based off the fact that he could read and write, he now got to work with organizations or multinationals, and is able to trade, even if he's trading, whether he's working as a as an employed staff or as a trader, is not able to have dealings with folks from the other side of the world. That becomes the ideal of what the world should look like, especially because he's coming from a place where they sold him, even though that was his fatherland. And I don't think that we usually think about these things when we criticize those people and say, oh, they are bad people, they are this, they brought Christianity. Let them sell you first. You understand? I mean, nobody will be sold in Jesus' name. Nobody will be sold as slaves. But the point is that if you put yourself in their shoes, you would appreciate what they did. And as far as I'm concerned, it was not wrong. Especially when you understand their own situation at the time. Where are we? I hope can we finish this book today? No, but we'll get somewhere. Then we'll continue later. The second feature of this early nationalism was that, as the Methodist minister quoted above put it, the nationalists desired that the British flag may be hoisted. This meant not that they wanted the country to be annexed as such, and as they came to realize the full significance of annexation, they did not want it. In other words, they didn't want to be colonized. At this point, there was no colonization yet by the British. But that they actively demanded European support and tutelage. It should be remembered that to begin with, for most of them, especially those from Sierra Leone, the typical figure of the Englishman was that of the kindly naval officer who broke their chains, or the benevolent missionary who put them through their ABC, took an interest in their education, and later employed them as catechists or put them in touch with English business houses with whom to trade. Between 1840 and about 1865, the belief was gradually built up in Nigeria that Britain desired nothing more than to assist these men gradually to create in their own country such a nation as they dreamt about, where the African would be able to show to the world that his capabilities were in no way inferior to those of other races. Various training schemes were initiated to fit them for this great responsibility. Several of them were trained in Britain in diverse fields, ranging from navigation to business management, from building and tile making to botany and medicine, apart from literary subjects. Think about it. After rescuing them and training them in Sierra Leone, they now ferry them to the UK and train them in navigation, in business management, in building, in tile making, botany, medicine, and other literary subjects. And for as many as were qualified, various opportunities existed for employment both within and outside the missions on a basis of equality with Europeans. The elevation of Crowther to the position of bishop in the Anglican Church in 1864 and the head of an all-African staff on the Niger marked the climax of this development. We'll come back to this when we're talking about what led to the creation of the African Church, but that'll be much later. Thus, these early nationalists believed that Britain was some sort of fairy godparent who would train them and send them forth to show the world what they could do. They therefore collaborated loyally with the missionaries. They played significant roles in pioneering various mission fields as interpreters, teachers in the evangelists in the villages, full missionaries in the main centers, working on various languages, reducing them to writing and translating the Bible into them, teaching in the training colleges of. They joined missionaries too in fighting the slave trade and in encouraging, by the way, slave trade that they stopped, I think I should mention, the slave trade that they stopped on the sea did not stop on the land. To be honest, are we being honest? It was the missionaries and the British and the returnees that stopped slave trade within our land. God honest truth. And they did that because it was abolished in their own country and they were trying to quote unquote spread civilization to the world, good or bad. I'll soon stop and then we'll continue next week, but let me just read one more paragraph. Thus, these early nationalists believed that Britain was some sort of fairy godparents who would train them and send them forth to show the world what they could do. They therefore collaborated loyally with the missionaries. They played significant roles in pioneering various mission fields as interpreters, teachers in the schools, itinerating evangelists in the villages, full missionaries in the main centers, working on various languages, reducing them to writing and translating the Bible into them, teaching in the training colleges or founding grammar schools. They joined missionaries, I see you West in the comment section, they joined missionaries too in fighting the slave trade and in encouraging the development of legitimate trade overseas in palm oil, indigo, ivory, shea butter, and cotton. Many of them pioneered the trade in new areas, and others were prominent in export and import trade. Similarly, they joined the missionaries to encourage I'll say that again. Similarly, they joined the missionaries in encouraging the British government to support these measures and to undertake fresh exertions to end the slave trade. They joined in demanding British protection at Badagry, Calabar, and Abeokuta in the 1840s. In the last mentioned place, they were themselves the soldiers whom an officer of the Navy was asked to drill and to arm in order to protect that quote-unquote sunrise within the tropics from the onslaught of the King of Dahomey. And above all, they supported the British action in Lagos. But what they said in brief here, maybe another day, was the war between Abeokuta and folks from Dahomey. And the British supported the Abeokuta against folks from Dahomey. And some of the people that fought in that war were also the returnees. One of those wars, I think, also had Madam Tinubu supplying guns and stuff. But let's continue. Above all, they supported the British action in Lagos, both the bombardment of 1852, which expelled Kosoko and installed Akitoye, and the annexation of 1861 forced on Akitoye's son. They saw all this as an increase of the benevolent forces that were working to create the nation they dreamt about. Sad. This brings us to the distinction which I had said should be drawn between these nationalists and those who, aiming at the preservation of the old order, oppose the imposition of British influence and rule. Kosoko was a patriot, not a nationalist. He was an enlightened man who had, through the support of his Portuguese and Brazilian advisors, brought some improvements to Lagos. But as a traditional ruler, he was obliged to protect the survival of Lagos as an entity. That's what I was talking about, cities. The real difference between him and the nationalists was that they were much more committed to change. On the one hand, Kosoko felt none of the consciousness of the place of the African in the world, and he lacked the vision of a new nation, large and powerful enough to win respect for the African. On the other hand, the early nationalists had little of Kosoko's patriotism, at least not for Lagos. Many of them were in fact attached to their places of birth. Abeokuta, or Ibadan, or Ekiti, or Ijebu, or Nicha, or Brass, or Lokoja. And as British influence penetrated into the interior and affected these places adversely, their local patriotism often came to clash with their overall nationalism. But in such cases, they only attacked the particular methods or policies of the particular British agents, not the British connection itself to which Kosoko was opposed. Therefore, they supported British against Kosoko. For these same reasons, the new converts in the various missions did not easily come to share this type of nationalism unless they were intimately connected with the emigrants or had the opportunity to travel abroad or to work in different parts and thus to become more cosmopolitan. By the way, this is what you see every time GRV speaks. What I just mentioned here, that's what you see every time GRV speaks. We're not going to go deep into it, but I'm sure you can connect the dots. The idea of is all clinical, all of us are clinical, the tribalize, everything is clinical. You know, we're almost done for today. For these same reasons, the new converts in the various missions did not easily come to share this type of nationalism unless they were intimately connected with the immigrants or had the opportunity to travel abroad or to work in different parts and thus to become more cosmopolitan. It was, however, missionary policy to encourage this cosmopolitan point of view, to take the converts out of the old society and gather them round the mission house, to make them refuse to take chieftaincy titles from the old town, and generally to weaken the attachment to the old community. The nationalists too, by and large, supported this policy, and on the whole, there was good accord between them and the missionaries until the 1860s, when strains began to be felt in their relationship and there were new developments in the nationalist sentiment. This is what we're going to discuss on Friday. What caused the strains? And did they redefine what nationalism would be for them? The answer is yes, by the way. But what caused the strains, and how did religion affect that? And how did that affect religion or Christianity? We'll talk about that later. Tomorrow, we'll do 500 years of Christianity in Yorubaland. Why are we doing all of this? To enlighten ourselves, to acknowledge what our forebears have done, to see the mistakes they've made so that we don't repeat them, to appreciate where they're coming from so that we can act. It is not entirely true. GRV is a staunch supporter of IPOB and Biafra. Yes, but that sentiment is there. I'm not defining who GRV is. I'm saying the sentiment of Obuala Ngogobi, Koreli Mata, is all everything. Is the sentiment of those who were, what's the word now? I don't know how to say it. Who have no connection with their own local space, and we're just thinking largely about this idea of, oh, we are all Africans. I'm not saying all the immigrants, all the Saros thought that way. That's why you see the conversation about. So I disagree. Jerry is influenced by his mother's mentality. You don't understand what I'm saying, to be honest. Have you heard him talk about Ekogodogbo? Kekan, where does that word, Ekogodogbo, where does that phrase come from? I'm not talking about the Twitter fight he's fighting. I'm talking about when he began, the rhetorics he was using. When he was saying things like Ekogodogbo, where was that coming from? When he was saying that they've been in the land since 18-something, where was that coming from? Have you ever seen any Yoruba person that wants to talk to you and say we've been in this place since 18-something, 1820-something, 1840-something? You will never hear it. Why did he say that? Why was he always saying the fact that we are cosmopolitan in Lagos? We welcome everybody. That's the same thing you are hearing. I'm not talking about the thing of whether I wanted Igbo or not. That is a subset of something larger. When you come to town and say things like Yoruba is not, I don't think in Yoruba, Lagos is too cosmopolitan to be Yoruba, everybody comes here. Where's that thing coming from? It's coming from the mindset of those who had no attachment to the place, but wanted to take that place for their own. And then in talking to the people that own the place, you have to create something that say all of us will Walajo Leko. Táwọn yòókù bá àwọn yòókù tó jẹ́ àwọn ẹbí àwọn tó bá ń bẹ̀ táwọn fẹ́ wọlé ọ̀hún àti wọn pé àwọn àjòjì godogbo gédégbé lèkó wà. You now call those people àjòjì godogbo. Have you ever seen anybody in the last 60 years that used that phrase in Nigerian politics, àjòjì godogbo? GRV used that phrase. And he was not talking about Igbo people, he was talking about fellow Yoruba people. In other words, his idea of cosmopolitanism does not include the Yoruba people because as far as he's concerned, they will displace him from being able to achieve his stuff. But the Igbos, like you mentioned, will be able to support him. So the Igbos, in reality, are supposed to be the tools that will help him accomplish his goal. But the Yorubas are too strong in Lagos. Therefore, we have to call them something that you call folks that have nothing to do with your land, Ajoji Godogbo. You now say Gedegbe Lokowa. And that phrase was used for Awo in the 1960s, 50s, 60s, 70s. I don't know who taught him, but he made certain statements that he used certain. Let me explain what I'm trying to say. He used certain words. That those words, you must know that he has sat down with certain people, and those people are definitely Saro. And it's because of those things that make people now begin to attack the Saro people, But at the same time, we also have to balance it that Saro was not even exclusive to Lagos. There were Saro in Ekiti. I've mentioned the Saro in Ijesha, for instance. Oba Frederick Hastrop Ajimoko was a returnee as well, but he's from Ilesha, and he became the Owa of Ijesha land. You have some of them return to Ibadan, to Ijaye, to Oyo. Samajaye Krada, for instance, is from Ishogun, which is close to Oyo. Samuel Johnson is from Oyo. And yes, Olori, Abeokuta. So you have people moving to different places. And You say you know one Astrop that is Ijesha too. Most likely is a descendant of that Oba Frederick Astrop. So all of this to say, I get your point. We're on the same page, by the way, whether on YouTube or on TikTok. I see both of you, but I'm looking at it from another perspective. But you are right. Someone said GRV was saying Gedegbe Lekowa, meaning that was Lagos Island. The remaining 99% of Lagos State landmass belongs to Awolowo's Yoruba Road, no Western regions on Gedegbe. White Ekubo, God bless you. But this is what he was doing. He was using the Gedegbe Lekowa, Tonlo for Action Group. And the Eko they were talking about was Eko. He is now transposing that idea to Lagos State. That's why I said he spoke to certain people that understood the politics of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and most of them were Saro and had that understanding of Awandawa as Eko. But that Eko they were talking about is not Eko State. It's largely Eko, the city. Because it's in that city that they found their foothold, whether the returnees or the returnees from Sierra Leone or from Cuba or from Brazil. It was there that they found their foothold. So it became the place to say, Awadawa Oba Wanleshe. They will now transpose the idea of Adawa to the entire state and say things like, oh, this Eko. So you're asking, which Eko are you talking about? Eko or Ikpinle Eko? And that's where, we'll probably discuss this further much later. But thank you very much for listening to today's session. I know we did a lot of reading. We're going to read more on Friday, but tomorrow we're just going to listen to, we're going to read tomorrow as well. But I'm sure we're all learning. You know what? Let's do, I think one person is trying to come up. I think I can still get one person. Oh, the person has dropped their hand. I was trying to bring you up, so we'll just have a reaction and then we'll call it a day. But I can read stuff in the comment section, Sha. What Lori wrote in the comment section, I can't even read this out. Yeah, I think it's somebody who is trying to displace Yoruba people in Lagos State by appealing to his mother's people. And that's why he cannot succeed. He has no regard for Yoruba culture. All these things that he's doing right now and going everywhere. Once you start having conversations and saying things like Lagos is cosmopolitan, and for me personally, anytime people use that word, Lagos is cosmopolitan, once they use that phrase, Lagos is cosmopolitan, I know where they're going. They are trying to tell you the fact that it's not exactly Yoruba, and that's what they usually say once they are done saying it's cosmopolitan. And I always say this: Lagos is not the first cosmopolitan place or cosmopolitan city in Yorubaland. As a matter of fact, it is one of the most recent in terms of what you are seeing now. I'm not saying, I mean, it's been cosmopolitan in the sense of attracting different people, but in terms of being a city, people are flocking to. The way we, and by the way, this Lagos mega city that we're talking about, this thing is less than 30 years. Lagos as a city is centuries old. But Lagos mega city idea is a Tinubu idea. Tinubu was one that introduced that thing. That makes it look as if all Lagos is one city. And it has one Oba, and the Oba is above Lagos. Not knowing that we have more than 50 kings in Lagos State. But we in our minds, we see the state as one city. That concept is actually a Tinubu idea. And that's why when people say things like, is the builder of the new Lagos, people say, no, somebody built something in 1942. They don't understand. It's more of the concept. Where you are going from one place to another, I don't know if this thing happens to you, by the way, we are done reading today. I don't know if this thing happens, I don't know if it happens to you, but do you have this feeling when you drive from, let's say you are going from Yaba to Akoka, and then Wajasi Bariga or Jasi Bagada, and it looks like you are just moving from one bus stop to another. You don't realize that it's not just, or like you are moving from one area to another, not knowing that in some cases you are moving from one town to another. But I don't know if it happens to you, maybe just me, because you don't have any bushes, you don't have anything to know that welcome to Kinikon, goodbye to Kinikon. You have moved into another person's town. In your mind, you're like, I just moved from one neighborhood to another, I just moved from one bus stop to another bus stop. The way or you now move all the way into Shomolu, it's just like one long trip. Meanwhile, these are different spaces. Someone says even Oniru to Elegushi. Exactly. Moving from Oniru to Bikate, all those places. I'm in Lekki, but in reality, you have moved from one person's town to another person's town. And that mindset is something that Tinubu gave us, but people don't get it. It has always been like this. Lagos Gogon, Onkoni Lagos State. The mindset that transposes Lagos idea of a city into Lagos State as a mega city is a Tinubu idea. And I think it should be given that credit. I mean, sensible people will give him that credit, unless, of course, people won't just talk nonsense. So someone says, meanwhile, you dare not try that in Yorubaland. True. Because they have autonomous communities. Every community is autonomous, and they have a way of doing their things. Where we are in Nigeria is a direct result of the influence of our history. If we rediscover it, everybody will know exactly where they belong. In the Igbo, no, you can't do that. Not even in one town. In some cases, let alone state, let alone region. But in Uburi and he really did so well. Have you ever thought about, when you think about traveling from, when I was younger, March holiday, and then I hear my sister-in-law say things like, Moloseko. I'll be like, we're in Eko now. When Moloseko, she's apparently going to Dumota. Moloseko. I'm like, we're all in Lagos. This was years ago. We're all in Lagos now. Which one am I going to Eko? It was from there I started learning that, okay, people know exactly what Eko is. It's just like Oyo and Oyo town, Oyo state. Lagos town, Lagos state. But for some reasons, people don't act like they know, even though I think they do. Anyway, we back to the thing about the Saro. Some of them also then supported the British invasion of Lagos, because as far as they're concerned, anything that will make the British, again, it wasn't about attacking a city, it was about ensuring the success of the British, right, in accomplishing the goals they had when they returned into what we now call Nigeria. And if Lagos was going to be in the way with the Akintoye Kosoko episode, whatever needed to happen had to happen. And so we had the bombardment, and a lot of people that actually supported the bombardment. So you have people like Labolo Davis, who eventually married Sarah Bonetta, who was the goddaughter of Queen Victoria. Sarah Bonetta is a Yoruba woman, by the way. Her name is Aino. She's from Yewa. I think it's Laro. She's a princess, taken as slave, got to England, and eventually Queen Victoria took a liking to her, took her in as a goddaughter. Lablo Davis is also Yoruba, and eventually marries Sarah Bonetta, who was the goddaughter of Queen Victoria, and Lablo also had extensive dealings in shipping and stuff. So many of them supported the British taking out Lagos. But thank you very much for listening. Any other thing I should read before we go? We'll be here tomorrow at 4 p.m. By the way, like I always do, I'm going to put up the account details because somebody may want to, before we go. But before I do, let me put this out there. By the way, does anybody know something about Facebook and Twitter and Instagram? My accounts were linked. I think they've been reporting my Facebook. So Facebook now asks for something, details of what's it called, ID and stuff. So I presented that. Facebook is now back up, but Instagram was deactivated. So if anybody knows how to fix it, I've tried, but I couldn't really spend all the time on it because it takes a while. It took me a while, and I didn't really get. So in short, if you know how to fix it or you know anything about it, please reach out. I need to get my Instagram accounts back. They are deactivated now, but say I can reactivate it, but I don't know how to. And I've tried different things. But we haven't because I've been very busy. But please, if you know anything about it, please reach out to me. Thank you very much. All right, I was going to say something. Yeah, let me read some of the responses. They'll respond to you eventually once you submit documents. I've submitted the documents, they responded. So Facebook is fine now. They've responded on Facebook, that is fine. The issue now is that my IG is linked to my Facebook. The IG was pulled down, but now they have not brought it back. If you not on Facebook now, the point is Facebook is back, but Instagram is still down, and I want to get the accounts back up. So if you know anything about that, please let me know. What was I? Responses on Facebook. Facebook ti kú látẹ̀kan ṣá, Olúwa Ọlọ́run Olódùmarè. Okay, there are more. Let's read YouTube then. This thing is showing streaming. I'm not sure. YouTube says, what about Deal Pure Water by Adeagbo Industries in Ibadan? One of the first persons to produce sachet water. Kill and sort be sachet water. Me not you. We shouldn't compare a millennial culture with a centennial culture. That's deep. Akador, good evening. Good evening, sir. Good evening again. T Majek says Equator. By the way, thanks for the gift you gave yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yeah, it was yesterday. Thank you. God bless you. All right, if you'd like to support us, please use the bank details pinned on the screen. We do these sessions every weekday, Monday to Friday. So we'll be here tomorrow at 4 p.m. Ife time, West African time. So we want to listen to one of the conversations we had earlier about the fact that Christianity has been in Yorubaland for 500 years. And this helps us to understand the works of our ancestors and not to repeat some of the mistakes they made in the past. And then we'll get deeper into cultural activism on Friday. Mama Lua, something just came to my mind right now, but how many people here know about Balogun Derinlo? Let's just do a very quick poll. If you do, just say yes. If you don't, just say no. Please say no. White says, open a new account. Maureen Badejo had over 30 YouTube accounts. No, not YouTube. I'm talking about Instagram. But thank you for that. So I'm saying yes, yes, no, 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 no. Yes, 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 yes. Okay. No. There's a book. I think it's here. This book has been sitting beside me for about 2 months because I wanted to have a session on it, but we haven't gotten around to it yet. We're going to have a session on this book very soon. It was written by Niya Boshade, the man who authored Victor Banjo, Revolutionary Betrayed. It's about Balogun Derinlo, whose base is Ibadan, one of the people that stopped the Fulani in 1840. So, 1840, I hope I got the date right. We will. It's not very. Can you see we talk pop? The pages are few, but it's rich. I mean, it has the plan of the battle, how they worked with Afonja, So I see a lot of. There are many yeses, but I see some no's. So maybe we're going to have a session on it soon. So I think we should do a session on this book. I've kept it here for a while. I just saw it this afternoon again, but it's very good. Oshogbo, yes. Olushola Ashinawo, Oshogbo, absolutely. I don't deep along. Get out, go back home. You're not coming into Yorubaland. So far, so very much no. Thus far have you come and you're not going any further. They made that happen. So we'll do this book soon. I think the book is also available on Redomi Books. But I'll also have a session on it. If not this year, maybe next year. But we'll come around to it. Christmas is fast approaching. I hope you are preparing for. I don't know why I said that. I just been noticing lights, so maybe that's why. All right. Thank you very much for being part of today's session. We'll be here tomorrow at 4 p.m. Like what we did today, we started a bit earlier. So we're going to start very early tomorrow as well. Oni said we will defeat them again. Absolutely. You see what, Wes, you are right. What Oni did was to draw strength from history. So he said, at the time they came and our father stopped them, if they come again, we will defeat them again. That's the point. That's the spirit. I mean, that I was actually proud when Oni said that thing. Yeah. And Ibadan people did a lot of work in 1840. And that's when you call that Yoruba is one. And this was before the British, were saying a little Kakura Apo. You know the funny thing, this was even before Kiriji. This was before Kiriji. So all this nonsense about, Yoruba people were not one. Number one, people that say this is don't have sense. But generally speaking, it's just, if you understand the way they fought, you're like, see, this is one people. And we did well, and we'll continue to do well. All right, before we go, someone said, Balogun Aderinlo Ole to Olorun Gbe Ogun Nla Fun. Emi ko ma so and be Balogun Aderinlo 1840 victory over the jihadists. Yes. Sir, he said they have never defeated us. They have never. Never. I mean, they won some battles, but we always win the war. And they won some battles, but we won the war. And I think the most painful battle was what happened in Odoyo, but that's talk for another day. But let's just keep learning from history and applying those lessons in our everyday lives. All right. Thank you very much for being part of today's session. We're going to end the live right about now. But before we do that, we're going to listen to anthems, Nigerian anthem and the Yoruba anthem. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, please, tomorrow, please send your request early. And I like the fact that we're closing around this time. It's beautiful. I'll be able to rest. So here's the Nigerian anthem. Please sing along if you know the lyrics. If you don't, kindly learn the lyrics. And also we'll have the Yoruba anthem after this song. Enjoy.
Nigeria, we hail thee, our own dear native land. Though tribe and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand. Nigerians all are proud to serve our sovereign motherland. Our flag shall be your symbol that truth and justice reign. In peace all battle honored, and this we count as gain. To hand unto our children a banner without name. Oh, all of ìṣọ̀kan àtòmìnira ní ẹ jẹ́ ká máa lépa tẹ̀síwájú fọ̀pọ̀ ire àtòhun tó dára. Ọmọ òkàlìyé bọ́ sípò ẹ̀tọ́ rẹ̀. Ìwọ ni ìmọ́lẹ̀ gbogbo adúláwọ̀.
Àwa ni ìmọ́lẹ̀ ògo adúláwọ̀. Ìmọ́lẹ̀ wọ̀ ni wọ́kùn lágbára Ọlọ́run. Ilẹ̀ Yorùbá ò ní bàjẹ́, Nàìjíríà náà ò ní bàjẹ́. Nǹkan tó bá dáwọ́lé a máa yọrí sí rere ni o. Ohun kan tá à ń kọ́ yìí náà, Ọlọ́run fún wa ní ọgbọ́n àti agbára láti múlò. Thank you very much for being here. God bless you and keep you and yours. May Nigeria work and may Yorubaland progress. In Jesus' name. White Kubo, I just saw it now. You wrote O-L-E. I saw Ole. You meant Ole. Emma Famisi. Emma lo Google keyboard. Yoruba wa mbe. I was like, Ole, but now I get your point. I get your point. Thank you very much for explaining. All right. I'll see you guys tomorrow at 4 p.m. if we're time West African time. On TikTok, we'll open before 4, so we'll have some music. And then by 4 or a few minutes after 4, we'll be able to connect others on the different platforms. Thank you very much for being part of today's session. Do have a lovely, lovely evening. God bless you. Amen. Eshe Odaro.